elected members and IMSB member. So first of all, apologies. So apologies from Councillor Casey and Councillor Newman, Councillor Quacks and Member Wilcox. Is it Councillor Wax, Councillor Quacks and Member Wilcox for lateness?
Happy to move.
I presume it is. Anyone else?
Happy to move, particularly Casey.
Thank you. I'll second it for that. Councillor Philippina, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. All against, carried. Are there any particular declarations of interest this morning? No? If anything comes to mind, please just let us know. There are no petitions, so we'll move on to public input. Oh, sorry, confirmation of minutes of the 14th of March. I'll move those, including the confidential second of Councillor Philippina. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Now, public input. We've declined one public input on chemical spraying of weeds, and it's Leonie Bartram. We don't have it on the agenda, and we've pretty much heard on the issue every meeting, and we are in touch with the group to make it clear that when the weed group has something to report back, we will do so, and they are most welcome to speak. And also that, you know, we have our community weed group that is up and running, and we will have our elected member weed group running. So, you know, there are plenty of opportunities for people to input. But we have, I have, on your behalf, accepted the request by Andy Higgs to present to us on an Auckland bike share pilot. Now, just before I invite Andy and the team up, I just have to do a little bit of an explanation of this. You'll be aware that Auckland Transport is working with a variety of players out in the market to look at a long-term bike share scheme. So we just need to be clear, we don't make that decision. That decision won't be made at this committee. So this is in no way to be interpreted as some sort of special deal for one particular group. We welcome and will look forward to seeing a whole bunch of players out in the market have a crack at getting a bike scheme, a consortium of organisations doing a bike scheme, or a variety of bike schemes running in Auckland. But the most important thing, and I want to acknowledge Councillor Chris Darby's ongoing advocacy, particularly in the cycling area, the most important thing we want to see is bikes on the streets of Auckland, making it as easy as we can for people to cycle. And nothing is better than an electric bike. And as a committed and passionate and somewhat evangelical e-biker, I think e-bikes will be the answer to all our problems. Having had to bring my car this morning because I have a meeting off-site until late tonight, I had to come by car. It was a disastrous experience. It took me an hour and a half, whereas my trusty e-bike from Te Atatū Peninsula takes 45 minutes every day. Rain, shine, hail, dark, light, whatever. And so I will now make myself be quiet, and I promise not to speak or editorialise or evangelise on this issue. I'll invite Andy forward to talk briefly and in a circumspect way about your ideas for a pilot.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the introduction. I know many of you and enjoyed my time on the board of AT and as an exec at this council, and you know, I led the partnerships initiative in the early days, so I know the challenges and the opportunities. I'd like to introduce Murray Robertson from Downer, is on our team, and Darlene Tana from eCycles New Zealand. And Darlene's going to introduce the star of this morning's presentation, our state-of-the-art public pedal electric bike from the vegan. And Rob Mayo is here, he's our transport advisor. Thanks, Rob.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Is it all right if I speak without microphone? Because, you know, the star of the show, she's just back here. O pai tērā?
I think it might pick you up, actually. If you speak clearly, I think the mic will actually pick you up from there. The reason why we're a little bit careful about mics is we're going out to millions of viewers. Actually, we're probably going out to about 4 viewers, but they'll be really interested.
No pressure then, Kari. All right, kei te pai. Well, first off, a bit of introduction maybe. My husband and I, Christian Hoff-Nielsen, run a company called eCycles NZ. And for the past 3 and something years, we've been active in our kaupapa to shake up transport here in Aotearoa, get more and more people moving their bodies on 2 wheels. And so eCycles NZ was born out on Waiheke Island. And we were sitting down last night and thinking, how many people have we actually put up onto electric bikes? Anybody want to hazard a guess? In 3.5 years, we've done 65,000 people onto electric bikes. And we're building capability all that time across Auckland. Now, we want to stay at the forefront of where electric transport is rolling. And part of that story led us towards Bevegan, which is a company based in Canada. They're one of 3 or 4 players around electric bike share in the world. And we cheekily invited them out to our Waiheke Island over the Christmas New Year period. They came down, we imported their demonstrator model, and we had a tutu around the island, and we thought it was really great. We gave some constructive feedback, and they were receptive in taking it. Now, since they went away, they came back to us and asked us to be their agents here in New Zealand. We took some time to think about that because we wanted to make sure that we'd have sufficient capability to be able to be available for on-the-ground support. And after some kōrero and with our teams of guys that we're training up, we said, hell yeah, let's go for this. And so I'm just going to introduce the bike quickly because having put so many people onto electric bikes, we're cognizant of the kinds of things that get people there. And the first thing that attracted me to this, lovely, is the ease. Because I don't have to explain anything about where's the motor or how to change gears or anything like that. The only thing that a customer needs to do is to change the seat height to the position of ride, and then they get on it and ride. The Bevegan bike has a Dyname proprietary system, which doesn't just help you as you pedal, but it glides you along. So it's a very different ride proposition to electric bikes as we know them currently in Aotearoa. Having said that, she's got all the bells and whistles, my darling. She's got cadence and torque sensing. She's got lights front and rear. I love it because she's got a really good bangable basket and you can smack the hula out of this and she's fine. So she's going to stand up
It's a
to the
woman.
tests of everyday different usability. So that's it.
Okay, thanks, Darlene. The reason we thought that was useful is that this is a complicated project and it's not something you just magic up, and you can't just go and enter this business from nowhere, and it's going to take time. And we're having done a lot of projects. As you know, we're a big believer in innovation in an agile way and in an iterative way, and we've been working on this project for a while. Before we knew about the Auckland transport process, the initial plan was to do it on private land, but working with Downer and others, we became conscious that the best benefit for this pilot was going to be on public land. The property owners also had that feedback. It is the best spots, and it's not going to be an easy thing to make successful. There's plenty of examples of bike shares that have failed, and
Back a little bit, Andy.
stand back a bit, sorry.
Yep.
And so in terms of the business case, we know that there's plans to work on a business case, but this is something that's been unproven. There's no precedent. The business case is challenging, and all cities are different. So our plan was we've put together a group of companies to stand up a pilot. And the idea was to, and we'll talk to the locations in a second. We're interested in land access. In no way are we trying to undermine anyone else. We're just here to help Auckland Council and Auckland Transport achieve the objectives. And if an outcome of this meeting is that you are planning to fund it and you are planning to fast track it, we're happy to wait for the process to take its toll, but it will run its course. But our experience is these processes really, with innovation, really produce an outcome in the short term, and we still think a pilot, the EV car share is a good example of something we put a lot of work into, and it didn't go anywhere. Council in that case was going to be an enabler, and there was no money, and so it's not easy to make these things happen. There's a number of companies that are very motivated this year to do it. There's a 6-month lead time when you order these bikes, so if we're going to do anything for this summer, that's the summer of 17-18, we have to order the bikes in the next month, which is before the EOI comes out. So that means another year we're waiting, and the city is already difficult to navigate. Uber is more expensive than you think. The Link bus takes 30 minutes from the bottom of town to Ponsonby, and we think a really good product like this, it will give Aucklanders a good option for getting around. Everyone I've spoken to would give it a try, and there's a lot of innovation in the marketing of these things because they don't automatically, work, and they don't automatically connect with people, and we've got a team of experts that can do that. And what we're here today is to say, here's an opportunity. We would really value some political support with AT and their process. We're not asking for any favours. We're not asking for any funding. We're not asking for any special treatment. The Vegan have agreed to take the bikes back after a year if it's not successful. So there's very little risk. All the risks are mitigated. And we think it'll be a great thing for Auckland. And I'll just finish by asking Murray, because I know we're probably short of time now, to just briefly speak to the locations and why we chose those locations in this hilly CBD we have.
Thanks, Andy. So the idea of the pilot is that would be 10 bikes operated in the Auckland CBD, and 100 bikes at 10 locations in the CBD, and that's we believe is a decent amount of bikes that can be used across a certain amount of hubs that offers connectivity. We've already had some advice this morning on where we could potentially do that at the last mile solution. And I guess it's trying to understand how can we stand up a pilot that has the most value for Aucklanders to give us both information about the bikes, how they'll work, and where the benefit really is. So the locations we've initially looked at are around the hubs, and as Andy said, the feedback we've had just looking at it initially is that if they're tied to existing Auckland transport hubs, we can provide the best level of service to actually demonstrate some real value. So those are, and they're in the document that Andy's already shared with you, and that's the area that we think that needs some focus in terms of how can we work with Auckland Transport and Council to provide something that's really useful and a meaningful pilot. And and I think, like Andy said, we've got a lot of companies that have come together who are very passionate about it. I'm probably the voice of reason from the person that represents a company that looks at long-term contracts. And I guess for me, the importance is actually standing up something that is proven and can be really valuable. And so from Downer's perspective, we have multimodal contracts in Australia for transport. So that's where the interest is for us. But more importantly, from my perspective, I think it's a great initiative. I'm really passionate about it. But we do welcome any feedback we can on where the pilot might best add value. And so those assumptions are really what we've made, but we really welcome any feedback on that space.
Okay, so we've probably got time for a couple of questions. Just remembering this is our chance to just understand something that might be happening via Auckland Transport, but just the reason for picking this up in this committee in the long term is we are charged with climate change innovation and carbon reduction, and obviously this fits right into that. So I've got Councillor Simpson, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Lee, and probably that might be all the time we've got. So Councillor, sorry, we saw them in a slightly different order. It's Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that. Tell me, how would you prevent theft of these bikes?
Each of the bikes are GPS tracked, so we know exactly where, I should say Bevegan at this point in time knows exactly where each of its bikes are in the world. They've rolled out in 5 different locations across the States principally and in Portugal, and they know where each bike is. This morning, before I left, the demonstrator model is housed at our Bikes and Barber Shop in Newmarket, and they were able to pick us up and then watch me ride down here, and they know she's sitting in the meeting right now. So that's going to help us enormously.
A quick supplementary, if I may. So if you were to be successful, would you make that data available? Because I think that would help frame, if people were using them, where they were actually taking them.
Yes, if we were in partnership with Auckland Council and Auckland Transport, we would definitely make the data available. And again, at no obligation to Council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and it's lovely to welcome you here with this exciting proposal. I know from the time that I sat on the board of Auckland Transport just how hard it is to get these kinds of initiatives up. And the conclusion that I came to, and I really welcome what you are proposing, but somehow to bring the hop card into it, that if you're looking at all modes of transport, increasingly we want to see the hop card being the ticket to ride. Have you given any consideration to that in terms of any proposal?
Yes, well, that hop card database is extremely valuable, and we see it as a really good promotional channel, but we don't imagine we'd be given access to that as part of the trial. Normally that would be reserved for the winner of the EOI process, but the bike is very easy to activate with the hop card. It works off RFID, radio frequency identification, and we would be partnering with the car shares like City Hop. We'd also partner with the AA, other issuers of cards. So that's definitely a strategy for pushing the bike share.
And in supplementary to that, have you, in terms of this presentation, have you modelled it on any international cities comparable to Auckland?
Yeah, that's why we're so keen on a business case, because we've looked at every city, from Madrid, where they rolled out e-bikes and they got 20 uses per day per bike in the middle of summer in July, city I know well, to some of the US cities like Baltimore, where it's between 2 or 3 uses a day. But really this is around subscriptions. It's kind of the gymnasium model, and we've got to drive, that's why we want a year trial. 12-month subscriptions and 6-month subscriptions. That's where all the real service revenue is. And believe me, this thing isn't fundable by corporates alone. We've supplied a few longer proposals. We've shared some of our IP around what sponsorship's worth, and sponsorship will only fund about 25% of it. The key to making this work is the marketing and getting people to use it. And a lot of people we've talked to, including Nextbikes, who we want to involve with this process, because they've got a lot of good knowledge themselves, is that people don't necessarily just use it, and a lot of the models around the world are based on public sector funding and support and subsidy, and that's not our intention. We want to prove we can run this without public sector funding, because it's a good service and people are going to use it. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
I think just to add to that, we definitely are very passionate about the concept of mobility as a service, and so you would have integrated ticketing, and whoever was to do a pilot, that would be in the right interest, that somebody shouldn't have to go from one mode of payment to another. Very, very important that it's a connected service. So that's absolutely where we see this going.
Thank you.
Good question. Councillor Lee.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. Question for Darlene. Kia ora, Darlene. I think it was about 3 years ago you came to see us at the Transport Committee, or the Infrastructure Committee, I think it was, and we went in to bat for you on Waiheke Island at Matiatia to get you a slot there at the car park, and Auckland Transport, shall we say, was less than enthusiastic. I think they've moved on since then with their plans for cycleways and so on. But have you noticed any change in regard to your situation on Waiheke?
Kia ora, Mike. With respect to that, Auckland Transport opened a tendering process for commercial leases down at Matiatia Ferry. And this was the sticking point at the last meeting, because there was no process available at that time. But they did launch that in December. They said that they would notify the winning applicants end of 2016, but pushed through until the 3rd week of January. We are all still waiting.
Really? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you do better in this one.
Might be
sure
something the
you will.
local councillor could pick up, Councillor Lee. Right, well, thank you. I'd like to move the, oh, you're happy to second, thank you, Councillor Fletcher, to thank Andy, Darlene, Murray and Rob. So much appreciated. It's been moved and seconded.
So what's the intention with that, though? Because surely you want to direct that somewhere.
And councillor, at the moment, the advice that I have is because this is now entering possible contracting, we're just going to thank our presenters. We then wait for the process to work its way through Auckland Transport, and then the next stage is between your committee and this one, the planning side of the placement of whoever the successful tenderers are or the successful pilot are. There's the decision made on the placement of the docking sites and the wider issue of all of the policy outcomes will come here. So you and I will work together on that, but it's not appropriate to preempt any of that now. So I'll put that, all those in favour please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you.
Hey, and thank you for the opportunity, and just in closing, I would say that I think you've got a good feel for the issues now, and we would appreciate any political support we could have, because I do think the officials need some encouragement.
Everyone needs encouragement
exactly,
on this.
And we don't want to wait 2 years.
Fair enough.
Okay.
And can we just acknowledge that beautiful and gracious machine that's here? And
well as the woman
I
with her.
particularly like the fact that you can kick the hooner out of it and she'll keep going. So there's a lot of us who identify with that. So thank you all, and safe riding back. Thank you. So members, we will continue, hopefully just a little bit more inspired. Now, we don't have any local board input, as far as I understand, to any of the items today. No extraordinary items, no notice of motion. And so we head into our first item, item 9. And I think we've got Nancy and Paul. Warm welcome. So with most of these, we'll take the items as read, but just have some introductory remarks, and for some of the ones that just need a little bit more explanation, a bit of a presentation. Thanks. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The report seeks agreement to develop an outcome measurement tool and pilot it with the Regional Sport and Recreation Grant. We'll use the Treasury CBEX tool as a starting point and refine it to meet Council's needs. We aim to have a tool that provides a clear line of sight between Council investment and outcomes. The cost of the pilot is estimated to be $20,000. Rolling out the final tool is estimated to cost $1.2 million. A large part of that cost is staff time. We'll test the overall impact on sport organizations during the consultation for the draft sports facility investment plan. And the slide shows the timeline for developing the draft plan.
Okay. Nothing you want to add? It might just be worth, I know we're going to have questions, but it might just be worth adding a little bit. The key issue in this is the fact that we need to understand the complexity of the tool that's proposed and the ability of us to pilot it, to hopefully find our way through some of that complexity so that we can get a better bang for bucks out the other end. It might just be worth putting a little bit of context around that.
Okay. The CBEX tool is developed by New Zealand Treasury to help government agency to make better decisions. It provides a consistent way to measure costs and benefits of a policy intervention, whether the costs and benefits are tangible or intangible. To do a full exercise will be quite complex and costly. So a main part of the pilot is to ensure that there's a guide that helps sports organizations to adopt the tool and a main point to achieve is to ensure that the time and effort spent on measuring outcomes is proportional to the scale of the investment.
I think that last point's really important. Okay, well, I'm happy to move the recommendations. Thank you,
and
Councillor
speaking to it.
Fletcher. And speaking to it?
Madam Chair, I really welcome this because I think we do need to move towards evidence-based decisions, and this is going to give us the ability to have that information. Too often in the past, particularly on sporting investments, they can become politicised, and I think that this will be invaluable if we can get the model right, actually helping us take it forward and make the right investment-based decisions for our community, and I congratulate the staff that have been working on this.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Couldn't agree more. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, two questions. I think the concept is great. You know, if we're going to expend money, we need to be able to measure how effective that expenditure has been. And if it costs you money to make sure you are expending your money efficiently and effectively, you know, that's the price of getting the outcome. My questions are twofold. Treasury's developed this, but who is operating the tool currently? Are other councils or other bodies utilising the tool? And the second question is around the cost. You've partly answered it. You said much of the 1.2 million is staff time. But is that a net cost? Because I presume, even without this tool, we do make efforts to measure the outcomes of what our expenditure has been in this area. So that may not be a net cost, or is it?
I can answer the first part of the question. It's been developed by Treasury. And it's a comprehensive guide of how to use the CBEX tool is on the website, and they provide guidance for any government agencies who want to use it. And it has been adopted by other agencies for particular investments, which is large scale. So for example, it's been used by Ministry of Health, and also I believe the Tamaki regeneration companies use it for large scale development.
Okay, thank you.
So I think just following on from that, we may be the first local authority that's really rolling it out across its investment portfolio. And the purpose of doing the pilot is that we're going to develop a generic tool that meets Auckland Council's needs. In response to your second question about the net cost of it, I guess what we've calculated is the cost to implement the model. It doesn't account for some of the reporting that already takes place. The paper that we presented to the committee last month when we did an evaluation against current forms of investment noted that there was variable reporting against some of the investments. So it's better if we start from zero, factor in all of those costs, and that's why we've presented those today. In addition to the staff costs associated with this, we've also factored in the costs of the sporting organisations in terms of their time to increase the level of reporting that we will require to measure those outcomes. And there will be a small component that will require a little bit of research so that we have a solid evidence base in which to apply the tool.
Okay. I'm still just trying to understand through you, Madam Chair. So the 1.2 includes the costs to the sporting organisations as well?
Yes.
So it's not just to council,
Correct.
But we could deduct from that 1.2 the staff time that we're currently using in less effective methods to try to determine the outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Walker. Councillor Wayne Walker.
So you may have already answered this question, but I'm assuming that this tool is going to be applied across the organisation, not just sports, but community facilities, other areas?
Through the chair, that is the intent.
And so probably similar pilots?
Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
And probably other pilots?
Depends on the results, I guess, from the pilot. If we get good feedback from the pilot, then we'll test its applicability across other investment forms in council.
Okay, and the other question I've got is just around the tool itself. Is the tool already available in digital form for us to look at? So it's not an issue?
Through the chair, it's available on the Treasury website.
Okay. Is there a link to that in the agenda?
No.
Through the chair, we could provide that information to the council.
Sure, I'm just making the observation, particularly given the digital nature of our agendas, if there is a link that can be provided so that it's easy to go the next step, that would be helpful.
No, that's a good idea, councillor, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I welcome anything that proves we give out value for money. I suppose $1 billion in the current LTP for sport and recreational facilities is a lot of money, and we need to know, of course, whether that would be well spent. My two questions are around, is this not part of a, could this not be part of a 17A review? That's my first question. And then my second question is around, you've identified the regional sport and recreational grant as the pilot mechanism. I think if you're going to pilot it, you need to pilot it across all the options. And I just wondered whether that particular grant for this, for this year will cover all the options. It's got to cover, obviously, fields, facilities, both indoor and outdoor and everything. Are we sure that the pilot can cover, maybe could even potentially, PPPs and everything? Are we sure that this pilot will cover absolutely all the things that we need to trial this with? Or are we better hand-picking certain things to test it with?
Yeah. Actually, I might ask Dean to respond to that because it's quite a wide question. Dean.
Thank you. Look, I guess my immediate response is that the cost of the pilot being sought is $20,000, and so it's focused. And that's not a bad thing in terms of understanding the cost and the benefit. We will learn as a result of this trial whether it can be applied more broadly, and I suspect we're probably better off taking a few steps rather than going very broadly at this stage, Councillor Simpson, and looking at whether it applies to a broad range of applications. Let's make sure it works for this, and then if we want to incrementally expand the nature and purpose of this investment tool, this investment tool, then we do so. My advice would be step through.
Little baby steps.
Yeah, I think so. And then at the end of the $20,000 pilot trial, and we'll go through a couple of annual cycles of testing with our partners out there in the sports fraternity, we'll be able to come back and say, yes, we think this tool will now work. And I should imagine for up to $1.2 million investment, we'll get advice on what the breadth and scope will be. They'll give us confidence that that's wisely spent.
I guess part of the concern is, I hear your question, councillor, but when you talk to some of our sports groups out there and our sports trusts, the onus on them collecting and measuring and working through quite complex measuring tools can often outweigh the small amounts of money we give them to deliver the projects. And I think that's the bottom line here. We need to, first of all, understand what we're measuring. So 17A, worthy as they are, doesn't necessarily measure the kind of outcomes that you would want here. So for me, the joy of the pilot, I think as Councillor Fletcher said, let's understand the kind of outcomes we want, let's get really clear, and then work out with good feedback from our sports organisations and our own organisation whether the measurement tools are actually fit for purpose. Yeah, Paul.
Just one further observation is that Sport New Zealand is also looking at applying this tool. So in terms of their requirements when they invest in regional sports trusts, we'll be looking to apply a similar framework. And I guess as we go through our pilot, there's an opportunity to work with them to test the results of the pilot as with the results of the outcomes that they're generating as well. So there's probably good alignment between the recipients from both Council and Sport New Zealand.
Added value.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too welcome this this pilot scheme. Just a couple of questions on. So when we had our alternative funding discussion, our initial discussions probably was it 2 years ago now, 18 months ago when we first kicked that off. it was described, wasn't it, as sort of low-hanging fruit, the Better Business case. In fact, there was the UK-based model Better Business case. Is this a offshoot of what Treasury? I thought it was a UK model that was being looked at. Is this a hybrid of that's been adopted by Treasury, and now we're looking at adopting or amending?
Yes, so I believe it was first developed by the UK government, and then our Treasury used it, adopted and tailored so it can be used in New Zealand.
Yep, great. So for those who weren't here in the last term when we went through the alternative funding discussions, it was identified easily that we could do a lot better in business case or cost-benefit analysis, just about everything. So this is actually a really fantastic practical lead-on from that. Just have a question around paragraph 18 and quick reference really, to other outcome-based measurement frameworks that you're looking at. So it's not just the CBEX, you're also looking at a couple of other models. How are you looking? Is that part of the 20K cost, or is this just business as usual for you to look at these other frameworks?
Through the chair, yes, looking at other tools is calculated as part of the $20,000 expense. So we chose the CBEX tool as a starting point, but because it provides a really comprehensive mechanism to measure outcomes. But we are aware there are other tools in the world which starts with similar concept, but differ in the details. So we'll look to use the CBEX as a starting point, but also draw on other tools and also draw on our existing operating expenses so that we can tailor a tool that best meets the needs of our council.
My last question, Madam Chair, would just be the relation to Finance Committee in this work. I realise it's here because it's a pilot and it's to do with the sports stuff, but I think it would be beneficial to understand more as the results start to come out, as your modifications start to get bedded in, that we understand more through finance, because as I said before, it was part of our massive body of work, or should be massive body of work on alternative funding. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll put... Oh, sorry, Councillor Collins.
Just quickly, thanks, Chair. I was just wondering, I understand that the pilot's going to be $20,000, but this is available to us free from the government? There's no cost in using this tool?
Through the chair, it's free.
Excellent, thank you.
Free from government.
Free from the government, if so.
Hallelujah. I am impressed.
Don't tell them.
Let's not get too excited. Councillor Philippina and Councillor Walker.
Chair, I just want to again support what Councillor Lee, Denise Lee, has said around finally we're at least getting a tool to end up sort of the outcomes. But I think one of the key things for me is in 19, which is staff will also seek to scale the tool so that measuring outcomes remains proportional to the size of the investment, as you said. I think it is key because without sort of having a one-size-fits-all, at least for us, it's a matter of adapting the tool so it fits our environment and not national or anything else. So I look forward to October, or when it comes back in regards to the final plan, Chair, but definitely ensuring that the small amount of fund we don't end up having our clubs and everything else sort of jump through hoops. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I understand that it's a tool we're getting from the government. We're going to customise it to suit our requirements, and more than likely I'd suggest that it'll also be widely applicable to other councils in New Zealand. And I guess the context I'm putting is this council, because of its scale, is doing a whole bundle of things across a whole bundle of areas that are going to be a benefit to a whole bundle of councils in New Zealand. And it's almost got to the stage where we need to set up some facility for costs and cost sharing and the like. I just put that on the table because otherwise, you know, obviously we've got an interest in enhancing local government in general in New Zealand, but you know, being first up is always expensive. So just put that out there, and I just wonder whether there's any project actually looking at that. And that might be through Local Government New Zealand, I don't know.
Through the chair, there's a conference on Thursday, Friday with all the territorial local authorities. It's been organised by Sport New Zealand, and we've specifically been asked to present on the investment approach and the work that Council's doing, and certainly that's an opportunity to share the methodology, and we will certainly put it out there in terms of sharing the information we gather as part of the pilot. Any intellectual property we develop should be available throughout New Zealand for other territorial authorities to apply.
Excellent. As we get information that they prepare, you know, some of our large rural councils are doing some excellent work that we get the benefit of. So finally, Member Brown.
Kia ora. Absolutely support the proposal and the manner in which you're proposing to go about it, but I'm just keen to understand where and how you propose to locate the pilot. That was around the $20,000 investment around your work. So in terms of so we would support everything that the method is proposing. But I guess that a peripheral concern is locking something in that isn't necessarily regionally au fait with places and spaces. So did you have a comment around how you propose to present the pilot once you're done?
Oh, Mace, do you want to have a crack at that?
Sorry, Mace.
That's right. Kia ora, Madam Chair, Member Brown. I think the next paper will demonstrate to you the regional grants program where we're intending to focus this pilot. So the next paper outlines where we're making an investment in sport and recreation.
Apologies, I actually didn't want to assume that. I was sort of thinking that might be the case. Kia ora.
You're welcome.
Comfortable? Excellent, thank you for that. So no further questions or comments. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. It's a good piece of work. Item 10 is the sport and rec grant allocation, and Councillor Sir John has obviously declared an interest, as he is the John Walker of the Find Your Field of Dreams, and this is his baby, so I think Sir John will acknowledge that you step back from that part of the decision. So we'll just, I think it's fairly straightforward. We've had a chance to discuss this in detail, but perhaps Kerry and Sharon and Mace, if you just want to introduce it for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. I'd like to highlight a few key points outlined in the report. We received 33 applications, total funding request of $1.52 million, with a total funding pool of $508,000. Further to the committee workshop on the 15th of March, 7 organisations have been recommended for funding. Total funding requests exceed the funding pool, so we have allocated the recommended amount based on the projects that most strongly align. Happy to answer any questions on specific recommendations.
That's great, and thank you for attaching quite fulsome information in the back of the report. Councillor Philippine now.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Kerry, Sharon, and also for the workshop on the 15th, where we went through the application, so thank you so much. But also to the crew that do the assessment based on the criteria, because at the workshop there were some questions asked in regards to why these ones did and why these ones didn't. The best thing, I think, is the fact that all applications and the detail regards to that was put into the councillor's room and it was available to everybody to have a look at. So I just really wanted to say thank you so much, and just to endorse your comments, Chair. So thank you, ladies and mates.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you please tell me how these organisations plan to acknowledge Auckland Council as a funder of what they do?
Sure. So as per the report, so outlined in the report, clause 2 of the funding agreement recognition sets out the obligation of the grant recipient to give fair and proper acknowledgement of council's support. So recipients acknowledge council's funding through media releases, the use of council logos on resources, the Auckland Council signage where appropriate, and also council are acknowledged through various things such as speeches, like the launch of the new Bikes in Schools tracks.
So when they report back on their funding, do they report, is that something that they report on as well?
Yes.
Good. And then will as funders of these things, do councillors get the opportunity to participate or get invited to when things happen in schools, for example, in their areas? Because we're told that, you know, some of the programs, for example, might be in 15 schools, but we don't know which 15. But if there was a school in somebody's area, do you get an invite just to go along and have a look?
That's a good question. Why don't we ask that that
I
happen?
think the local
that's a good
boards are getting
idea.
invited, but not
Yeah.
councillors.
Okay, so I think we can make that clear to the large groups that we are giving a lot of money to, that there's an interest by the local councillors in being involved as well. I think that's very fair. Good idea. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. With any of these successful applicants, do they have any charging regime themselves, like the ones that go into the schools? Do they charge for any of their activities?
No. No,
So
so these are all, one of the key outcomes is that they're affordable and accessible.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, having looked at the applications and through the assessment and process, that none of them are charging for their programs.
Okay, all right. Just in terms of the bikes in school one, did they have any plan to, and I see they've got a very ambitious program to try and get, you know, every child on a bike. As part of their application, do they have any plan to engage or to use the staff resource of schools to achieve that laudable ambition?
Yes, so part of the package that the schools receive and part of the regional position is that they do actually have a coach or a cycle skills instructor that goes into those schools and does some mentoring with the teachers. So each teacher is actually given, it's 1 to 2 days of specific cycle skills training, so therefore it does become sustainable within the school.
Good question. Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Chair. So just on the bikes in schools too, which is, I'm just looking at that one. What input in our recommendation, or your recommendation to us, did Auckland Transport have, considering their travel-wise coordinators, and also what supplementary funding is this program getting from NZTA?
Great. If I may, through the chair, just answer to your first question. Auckland Transport actually part funds the regional, forgotten the name, the regional Bikes in Schools manager role, so 0.4 FTE, so they part fund it, and so we're looking to part fund the other 0.4 FTE. And an answer to your second question, at this stage, NZTA don't fund the role, but they are the Bikes in Schools or Bike On Charitable Trust, but they very much support it.
Okay, so just going back to the AT role, so you've told me that this funding picks up the balance of that that lead role.
Correct.
But I'm just wanting to get a sense of our discussion with Auckland Transport as to where the Bikes in School program fits in to the Travelwise program, because they are doing that as well. So I'm just wanting to have some confidence that this decision of 83K for Bike NZ is fully informed by Auckland Transport's implementation of TravelWise.
Yes, so with Bikes and Schools, they do work with the TravelWise coordinators within the various areas, and especially with some of the new infrastructure that's occurring in the areas, for instance, in Point England, that one particular school in that area has now got a track, and Auckland Transport is working with the school and with Bikes and Schools to ensure that that infrastructure is well utilised outside of the school as well. So there is definitely a very strong relationship with the TravelWise program, and in fact the staff member or the regional project manager of Bikes and Schools was previously at Auckland Transport, so knows the organisation intimately.
Okay, look, I guess I want to know clearly though, is this recommendation that you're bringing to us supported by Auckland Transport's TravelWise team? That's the question.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a couple of questions that go to the funding and leverage and associated aspects. In a number of instances, the particular project is going to use council facilities. That could be swimming pools, for example, and that's John Walker Field of Dreams. In another instance, obviously netball, using facilities that council is effectively providing. In other instances, not. For example, the Bikes for Schools is using school facilities and effectively capital that they're raising. So is there an assessment across those things and the leverage that we might be exerting in terms of, say, for Bikes for Schools, pulling in quite a substantial amount of funding that's often through fundraising and the like on the part of schools to make those things happen?
I'm just, Councillor, sorry, I was just trying to follow your question, and I just think we may be spreading our tentacles a bit too widely. The way that this works, and we all had the chance to go through the very long proposals, all of the requirements that we have to meet are met by these organisations. The wider requirements and wider relationships, I guess, are up to them, but they meet our requirements as an organisation. So I'm sorry, I've just kind of lost the thread of your thinking a little bit.
The thread that I'm putting is following on from Councillor Darby, where the Bikes and Schools has an association with TravelWise or travel planning. In similar fashion, we've got other proposals here that have relationships with other forms of funding that are part of a general context. So I'm just asking whether the context of our evaluation takes those things into consideration. So I'll just leave it at that. The other comment that I make is just around the numbers that are participating. And I just make the observation that on the face of it, a simplistic number's fine, but there's often a qualitative difference between the numbers. For example, the Foundation for the Blind, that's effectively training trainers who are going to have a significant impact on a lot of others, as compared to, say, another proposal that might just involve some visitation on the part of an individual to a swimming pool or the like. So some quite big differences there, and I don't doubt that the evaluations take that into consideration.
Yep. Okay. I think that's statement more than question. Member Wilcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question relates to Māori outcomes. We discussed all of this at the workshop, so I'm quite comfortable with the process so far. But we did mention in IR, from the IR November 2016 regarding Māori outcomes for community grants. And what stuck out for me was actually we don't have that much data on how many Māori are being involved or are participating in programs that may not be directly targeted at Māori or seeking a Māori outcome. In our report here we say 3 of the 7. But I was wondering, well, perhaps we should be asking all organisations to which we give funding to report on Māori outcomes, so that the dearth of lack of knowledge that we have regarding the data actually starts to fill up. One of the things that came out of that IR November 2016 was that basically Ōrākei didn't fit in there at all, and yet I know for a fact that Ōrākei throws quite a bit of money at Māori outcomes. So, these are the things that we need to kind of fill in and work forward towards. So just because it's not aimed at Māori doesn't mean there's not a Māori outcome in the kaupapa. So I would like to see that we ensure that that data's also received from those that didn't identify Māori outcome.
If I may, through the chair. So through the funding agreement, a project-specific KPI is set for all grant recipients with an outcome to increase Māori participation in sport and recreation. So regardless of whether they have actually identified it as something specific in their funding application, it is actually a KPI or a key performance indicator within the funding agreement. So we do actually have that reported back to us.
Yeah, supplementary to that? Yeah, and that's fine. I think I'd just like to have some comfort in the fact that they're aware that they should be looking for those Māori outcomes as well. Not just saying, oh, well, no Māori turned up, I turned up, I got my name Wilcox, not from someone rowing a waka. So let's be honest here, so sometimes Māori turn up, but not necessarily wearing the Māori guise.
If I may, just through the chair, for instance, with a previous applicant who received funding for coaching, they actually work with Heoranga Potama to actually increase Māori participation. So it's also about those relationships. And for instance, Auckland Badminton, who were going into schools, we actually ensured that they were actually going into Kura Kaupapa Māori schools as well. So they were actually offering the program to those schools as well. So there were more opportunities.
Thank you.
So I think what I'm hearing is we're actually driving some of those outcomes and the decisions we make to achieve them. Yep, okay, that's clear. I've got Councillor Hills, Councillor Sayers and then Member Brown, and then I think that might be it. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. It's probably a bit of a Kathy Casey question, but obviously it says on page 23...
She just texted you.
She should have.
Phone
a friend. No, but we talk about the recognition of Auckland Council, and obviously it's in there and part of the funding agreement. But how is it checked up on? And when we're talking, some quite large amounts of money, how well is it recognised that Auckland Council, but also, ratepayers are funding it? So they can walk in and see this is a great event run by great people, but also I've helped actually fund this, or it's acknowledged that Auckland Council are a part of it. So I know that there might be a little line on their collateral, but how do we make sure that it's actually obvious to the participants or the parents or the whoever?
Just through the chair. So as Kerry mentioned before, there's a number of different ways that the organisations can acknowledge council, and often when they report back, they'll provide evidence of that. So whether it's photos where there's signage been up, whether it's some of their resources or their brochures or their advertising material that has Auckland Council logo on it. So they will often they provide that to us as evidence. And then of course a number of the events that we across our team, across the sport and recreation team, we attend a number of these events as well, so actually see firsthand what that acknowledgement is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions just relate to, on page 20 of our agenda, item 26, the John Walker Find Your Dreams, Field of Dreams Foundation. I've got about 3 questions that are probably interrelated. The first one is just given such a, with respectively to Sir John, it's such a high-profile kind of activity we're undertaking, do you think there's any way that that might be able to become a bit more self-funding, looking at the operational costs that are associated with this in the future? Is that a possibility?
I think that probably, while we're dealing with making the decision on the grants, I think that's a wider discussion that we could probably pick up directly with the organisation or the staff, because I think that's out of the scope of this discussion today. But it's a good question. I'm sure Sir John will help you with that.
Well, I do have another further two questions there, Madam Chair, and that's the 230,000 that is the operational expense. In the report, it mentions that that's for employee expenses, marketing and promotion, and office administration. Could I just get a feel for how many staff perhaps we're talking about in terms of the employee side of those costs? In other words, what are the employee expenses that we're funding there? And probably particularly number of people.
So in terms of actual administration staff, there's, my understanding is 1.5 FTE, and the rest are all program staff, so that's not covered within our grant. So the way the funding is provided to Find Your Field of Dreams is to support their overall kind of overhead, I guess, so that in terms of their program delivery, that can be sustainable and they can access other funding for their program delivery.
Right, and still seems, just to me, it just seems a very high amount at $230,000. And just my final question was, just looking at the other programs there, like the swimming programs, the run and jump and throw, the gold lift and gold for the West programs. Is there duplication between those programs?
No, we don't believe so.
Right.
They all target very different aspects in terms of participation and target groups and outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I think, Greg, your first question, just to go into detail, it's to take that straight to our staff would be a useful thing to do, I think, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you.
Member Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to explore, if you were, looking at the Tamaki Headinga Waka Fund, of which we obviously support, but the inclusion of waka as sport and an element of recreation. Therefore, then somebody, like, because when I read like Māori are increasing their participation in sport, the opening question I have is, well, what was the starting point for Māori? Where did you base that increase from? So when I looked at the Tamaki Headinga Waka Festival and the criteria of that approval, then there's some elements that are absent that should be calculated into this, or calibrated into this formula of Māori participation. For example, the taiaha classes, of which are multiple throughout the region, as another form of, and all of these other arts, if you were, that I'm reading is all of a sudden a sport. So there's a degree of interest around something that is an art that arguably is being interpreted and applied for as a sport. And last but not least is, because I do note the presentation of the Etude folk last week that gave us a synopsis of an increase of 10,000 of the year 2015-16 through a participation number of 35,000 for this current year, which is really great. But behind that is also still Māori at home who are demanding the time of their people at home to mow the lawns. Hey, the real simple stuff around family things that are also so valuable to family, like competing for our own people's time, whether it's sport, whether it's marae, whether it's tribal business, whatever it might be. And so I'm keen to understand at a future point, where did we start from to suggest today that Māori are increasing their participation? Because I can look at that comment around associating the 1987 Rugby World Cup where the great Waka Nathan ran around or walked quickly around Eden Park with a rugby ball. He placed it in the middle and that kicked off the 1987 Rugby World Cup. And that was the Māori role and presence in its entirety for that whole campaign. Yet in 2011, there was great degree of not just Māori but our Pacifica folk as well in terms of their presence and contribution to our country. So the culture from 87 to 11 took a quantum leap in terms of the global picture. And arguably you could look at all of that in the context of today's submission and say, oh, well, that was sport. Eh? That was sport. They did the karanga, they did the waka, they did all of these things. And there's a bit missing from your analysis or your summary, and I know it's just a summary, but it wasn't really just the waka that brought people to Tāpiki Headinga Waka Festival. It was actually the people, the weather. It was a great couple of days. And actually this year it was kapahaka, amongst other things, and some visual tā moko on folk, especially on their faces, that attracted people outside of the event to go to the event through either hearing the kapahaka or looking at the tā moko stuff, as opposed to the core driver of it being a waka festival.
We're just having a little bit of trouble getting to the thrust of the question.
Well, I want to know in a timely manner what is the foundation of where it is this council even suggests that Māori are improving their participation in council-related sporting events. Kia ora.
Okay, so that's probably a little bit bigger than the decision about whether we fund Tāmaki Heranga Waka Trust, and I think that probably relates a little bit more to our previous item, which actually looks at the appropriate measurement tools for participation rates and how we actually get different groups involved. So I think we need to have a different discussion about participation of Māori. The key decision here is funding this trust or not, and when we have a look at who has actually put in applications, this is one of the big applications we've got for a directly Māori focused trust to seek funding for the Waka
With respect, Madam Chair, the John Walker Field of Dreams is actually, with respect, far more significant in the practical sense than the Tāmaki Headinga Waka Trust event. Kia ora.
Okay. So, but we're not hearing anyone saying we shouldn't fund it. That's my basic question. Just looking at what this item is fund or not fund? That's the key question. The bigger issue of Māori participation, I think we need to pick up as an ongoing issue for this committee. Yeah.
And through the chair, I'm happy to follow up with you, Member Brown, and talk to you in terms of their participation numbers and how we work with Sport New Zealand around measuring those Māori participation numbers across a period of time and how we've reached those.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just can't see whether it's been moved or seconded, Madam Chair.
Happy to move?
Yes,
Excellent.
And
Councillor
just a
Filipina
quick
will
comment.
second.
I mean, we all have the same issues. We're all elected from our own areas, and for me, when I look at it, I'm always going, oh, are my people going to, get a benefit? So I was in the meeting when we went through these, and what I keep going back to is the criteria. And so these, though there were many that I would have loved to seen funded, these ones specifically met the criteria and create a kind of a balance, and they are umbrella groups. There are other avenues for other smaller groups that aren't regional, and we can make sure that they have an opportunity to apply there. So unfortunately, I think sometimes when people apply, sometimes it can be a tricky process, and they're not quite making sure they meet the criteria before they apply. So always some people will be disappointed, but there will be other avenues for them. So I commend this to the committee, Madam Chair. There's a huge amount of work being done. The councillors arrive and a lot of the preliminary work is done to help us form our decisions. So thank you to the staff for that piece of work.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. So that's been moved and seconded. we've got most of the issues out of the way. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So a little bit of discussion that might need to happen directly with some of the members of the committee. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for the hard work. Item number 11, Arts and Cultural Regional Work Programme. And this is a fairly straightforward item. It
I'm happy to
is
move this.
again what we did,
I'll
where we
second.
just vary the budget. Councillor Clow,
Just want a
Councillor
question. I just have a
Philippina,
question.
and a question, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Madam Chair, most everything here is self-explanatory. It was just the various gift offers. Yes, it's only 10,000, but I didn't quite understand, and I couldn't find anything in the report. Additional funds required to meet the asset management planning requirements. Does that mean those are items that we've been gifted and we have to plan managing those? That's what I'm not quite sure of, what it means. Can't find a description anywhere.
We're going to have to get
an arty person
to answer that. I think we might have moved a little bit more quickly than our
Maybe, Madam Chair, someone can just find the answer for me later. I'm not going to stop this.
It's a good,
but
it's a good question.
There's no real description of what that is from my point of view.
I think we can circulate that. Oh,
Thank
Dean
you.
can.
Oh.
No? Why don't we circulate the answer?
Thank
I think
you,
it's
Madam
a question
Chair.
a few councillors would want to know. So we might just need to couch. We can either come back to this. Let me see what the questions are. We'll see if the questions are of a nature where it would be useful to have a staff member here, and we can always put this off until we can get them here. Councillor Fletcher, are you wanting to talk about Mount Albert?
Yes,
think it
Madam
would be
Chair.
right- I
Having
think-
just attended the sod turning this morning after the long-awaited Mount Albert upgrade, which has been long considered by this chamber, I had no reference from anyone present this morning that they were willing to pull the artwork there. So I really just want some comfort on this matter.
Councillors, I'm going to suggest, why don't we just do a precedent of business? We'll move to item 12. We'll give people a chance to get here, because I know for yourself and for Councillor Casey watching, who is omnipotent and all present at this meeting, that it would be good to be able to answer that. So we'll put this on hold, councillors. We'll move to item 12, and then we'll come back to item 11. So I'll move precedence of business. You happy to second that, Councillor Fletcher? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So we'll just tie-ho.
Sorry about that.
Do item 12. I think that's fine. This is probably one of the good things about this, is the fact that people can keep an eye on how the timing's going, and they can use their time wisely. We just seem to have moved ahead with great speed. Now, we might not have our water team here yet, so I'm going to suggest...
Item 13's here.
Item 13. Good. So let's just change that and do the item 13 team, and then we will come back to item 11 and 12. Excellent. It's better to do this than have people sitting waiting for items that take forever to get there. So we're now on item 13, everybody. Just to be clear, the appointment to One Voice, and just before we go into the item, I've had Councillor Philippina and Councillor Cooper express an interest in being part of this, so
I'll go with
we'll
my
just
sporty
have
chum.
any just introductory remarks?
Just very briefly, through the Chair, as outlined in the report, this report seeks council appointment to One Voice, which is Auckland Sport and Recreation Group. One Voice is an Auckland-wide independent voluntary multi-sectoral group that works with Auckland Council and other entities to provide strategic advice and advocates across a single voice for sport and recreation.
So last time we had 2 councillors and an alternative, so we have got the ability to do that. So if someone would like to, let's get the recommendation up for a start. Is there someone who'd like to move? You're happy to move that, Councillor Simpson, seconded, Deputy Mayor. So we've got speakers. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure, I've been the representative on One Voice since its inception over the previous 2 terms of council. I'm happy to make myself available. I think I've got a fair bit of experience and an abiding interest in sport and recreation across a number of sports. I'm sure I'd have the support of the people on the One Voice team in that regard.
Oh, very good, Wayne.
Okay.
Very good. Awesome.
Well, councillors, as with all of these things, though, we've heard, from Councillor Cooper and Councillor Filipaina, it may be that, given everyone's workloads, Councillor Walker, are you happy to pop yourself in there and share the role with the councillors?
Sure. I mean, it's actually
As an
desirable
alternate?
to have more people there. I was the only one as a councillor that's pretty much attended the meetings that I can recollect to date, even though there have been other councillors on. So, I mean, by all means, cast the net wide. That's not an issue. There's no issue around space. It's a voluntary group, so there aren't any costs significantly around the group itself.
Madam Chair,
Councillor Simpson.
if I may, look, you've got 3 people who want to do it. Does it matter if we have 3, if you appointed them all and if only 2 turned up? Would that fine?
I think that sounds like...
Fine.
Is that going to...
Is that all
Will
right?
One
I mean, I'm
Voice
just very-
feel swamped by having 3 people and they can work it out themselves, just as long as we have some continuity and some enthusiasm?
Through the chair, in the past, not last term, but the previous term, we did have an alternate. And the reality of when we try to not schedule the meetings when councillor meetings are on, but the reality is that sometimes councillors are unable to make it.
Lovely. I think we've got a solution. I'm
Madam-
going to...
What about
Quick, while I'm
IMSB?
ahead. Member Brown.
You are ahead. However, I note in the earlier tenure that we had an independent Māori statutory board member included in this group, who's sitting to my left, remains available for the Māori board to continue their presence, and want for the committee to consider that. I'm unaware of the origins of the last tenure and how my fellow member was included.
Sorry, I may have read this incorrectly. I presumed that that was in the hands of the Independent Māori Statutory Board, that we provided elected members and Independent Māori Statutory Board provided Independent Māori Statutory Board.
Thank you. We're happy with that. Just wanted that on.
Good.
Thank you.
Cool.
Although, point of clarification, in my nomination of Independent Māori Statutory Board Wilcox in the last term on the Parks Committee, it was on the basis of his skill sets representing the general, the general grouping. So he was an outstanding member and representative for that role. So while I am, so while I'm happy to see it as an AMSB appointment, I do want to draw attention to the fact that he discharged his duties with great aplomb.
And we could be a bit sneaky then, Councillor Fitch, and we can say we provided our elected members and IMSB can provide the IMSB member, and we can get that.
Or for the price of 3.
Indeed. They'll be delighted. So I will just take it that the Independent Māori Statutory Board will provide a wonderful person. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Awesome. Right. Okay. So who's arrived out or water? Water's arrived. Good. Water got in first. So let's move to item 12. And just while everyone catches their breath, I just want to take a moment. There's been a little bit of media around this and a bit of preemptive media around this issue, which I want to put in context, and it's quite important to do so. We have a submission in front of us that's been prepared by our staff. They've synthesised a whole lot of exceedingly complex information and put together a very good submission based on the questions that the government have asked. It is, however, absolutely clear to us as elected members, that the issue is wider than simply some of the freshwater issues that the government has raised, that the Auckland region is entirely different to the rest of the country, and as the biggest rural council and the biggest urban council, our issues are of stormwater and water quality in our urban area as well. So it's to that end that we really welcome the group that has announced their getting together, the Stormwater Alliance. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the group, but I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us to work with that group, and hopefully a group of councillors and independent Māori statutory board member who work on now our interpretation of what's required in this submission. So just to clarify, I think some of the media and some of the comments was that Auckland Council is simply focusing on cows and paddocks. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are absolutely focused on urban stormwater quality, but the questions posed by government did not envisage a submission that would do that. So this is now our chance to put that in there. So I want to, first of all, before we embark on the item, I want to acknowledge our staff who've been doing this work, and I want to signal very, very clearly that for the next couple of weeks we will continue to work on this submission, including those much wider issues of urban stormwater and urban water quality. So, sorry to do a big long introduction, but I think it's very important that we just get that out on the table. So, welcome to our team, led by Dave, who've been working on that. And thanks for the energy that's been put into this. So there's a reasonably comprehensive PowerPoint thing. I just forgot what it was called for a moment. One of these things. That thing. There's quite a big one of those, but because it is a complex issue that we need to be very clear on, I'm keen that we take the time now to do this well. So thank you.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today on the government's proposals for clean water and the proposed Auckland Council response to that particular package. Do I have a slide thing? Yes, let's grab it. So perhaps just some opening remarks. This has been quite a contentious issue around the country. It's generated quite a lot of interest in terms of people's interpretation of how freshwater outcomes should be achieved. It's an ongoing issue. It's been with us for some time in terms of the need to implement the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. The government package looks to address responses to the next steps for freshwater package that was released in about February last year. Auckland Council submitted on that at the time, and what the current clean water package does is picks up on some of the key points in that, which is on the third bullet point there, changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, some of the technical aspects, but it also introduces ministerial targets for swimming, and that's partly because the response from the public at large, about 4,000 submissions last year, was along the lines that they didn't want to necessarily focus on just wadeability as a sort of bottom line for achieving water outcomes. They wanted to actually have something more like swimming as a bottom line. And what the intent of the minister's approach is to sort of say, well, how are we going to address that target? So he set some central government targets that he wishes the people, the community, and also councils around the country to work towards. So I'll talk about that briefly, and I'll also then talk about some of the maps that have been produced to map swimmability, and that has been produced as an information piece for the community, and it is basically a national indicative piece for everyone to look at and make some sort of broader observations about swimmability as it stands today. And then there's a couple of other issues within the package that includes the observation about how the Freshwater Improvement Fund would work, and there's some criteria that we'll look at. And similarly, there's a proposal to introduce national stock exclusion regulations, which were an issue that was were entertained last year when the next steps for freshwater was advanced. So we'll just work our way through these 5 components. So firstly, the swimmability target, the 2 ministerial targets are up there on the screen. 80% of large lakes and rivers are swimmable by 2030 and 90% by 2040. Large lakes is defined as 4th order streams or above, and that is typically streams that are of a depth of 40 centimetres, sufficient for swimming in. And I guess that's the only reason why that was used as a target, was that they were trying to focus on what are the rivers that would typically be used for swimming in. The issue that's then raised is what about small rivers, which is really important for Auckland. And I guess the key thing we're saying here is that these targets don't necessarily remove the need for us to have management goals for those small rivers, but we need to be very clear as to getting clarity from government as to what the intent is now with the focus of councils as it may relate to small rivers. So we'll get onto that in a minute. The model itself was developed using quite a lot of historic data and focused on some predictive values which included things like climate, river flows, land cover usage, geology and catchment size and elevation. And there are some concerns by staff about the method used. It won't necessarily in the future pick up, for example, let's say we put in a whole lot of mitigations to improve a particular outcome for a watercourse. That won't be picked up in the model outputs because the inputs are only related to some of those fixed variables. So we feel that the model as itself, as a tool, is not necessarily going to have future application as it stands. The other thing is that the model is all about providing an indication of the level of E. coli in rivers or cyanobacteria in lakes. So they're sole indicators, and so it doesn't actually sort of talk about the flow of a river, it doesn't talk about the flooding, the turbidity, those sorts of characteristics which you might want to look at if you're going for a swim. And so the key point here is to note that, and it's quite clearly indicated in the consultation material, that this is focusing on E. coli as clearly an important value to, attribute to assess in terms of public health and reducing the risk of public health issues going forward. Now, I've just mentioned just broadly that the use of the maps in the future, it's uncertain as to how they'll be used. This has been quite a big exercise for MFE and their consultants to get these maps done originally. But in doing so and actually putting out these maps around the country, they've actually created quite a kerfuffle. Quite a lot of people are quite concerned about the utility of these maps, and they are something that we'll have some ongoing discussion about, I would suggest. So just what does this look like in practice? The map for the Auckland region, that's it up there, it basically sets out to describe what the swimming categories are for each of those rivers, whether they're in an excellent condition, a good condition, fair condition, intermittent or poor condition. There is not a lot of rivers or lakes in the Auckland region simply because of the fact that we don't, just by our geography, we don't have 4th order rivers. And we don't have large lakes which would meet the sort of test for what that might involve, which is 1,500 metres perimeter to actually be suitable for this particular methodology. The maps are an information tool. They're not suggesting that we would want to use this information in a comparative sense with other centres, although that's how it has been used. we've made it quite clear to MFE that when you look at the Auckland map, it may include a lot of model data and real data, which may have been collected over a number of years for state of environment reporting, which may not be comparable to the kinds of data that's been collected in Taranaki or Hawke's Bay or wherever else. So they are intending to try and make this a national indicative descriptor of how suitable water quality is for swimming. And the other comment, obviously, is that the current focus for Auckland Council has been to put a lot of effort into coastal swimming locations by virtue of the fact that people swim more on the coast. So, you know, this is one of the big things that we're sort of observing, is that we've already got an existing program in the coast. If there will be a need to shift our emphasis or add to our emphasis to the freshwater, that will obviously have implications for resourcing these kinds of issues. So the categories that I had in the figure before are sort of from excellent through to poor, blue through to red. And I guess the other observation here is that there are 4 different metrics that have been put up on the MFE website for discussion. But in terms of what's included in the consultation document, they only include the first column in the National Objectives Framework, which is the percentage of exceedances over 540 E. coli per 100 mils of water sample. So and I guess the relevance of that we'll see in the next couple of slides, but the point that we want to really make here is that the more measures or metrics that you use, the more richer description you will have of the actual water quality outcome. However, this, and again, you don't need to focus on the actual sites here, but
I can't read it.
Yep. It's simply to note that the first column there gives you an indication of the different levels or different categories that are applicable to each of those sites. But then when you add in the other metrics on the right of that, and when you actually look at assessing them against those metrics, you might actually get a different result. So a river that might have a blue category, let's say, or I don't know, a yellow category, might be a red category in the next column over or something like that. So it depends very much which metric you use, and I guess what we're trying to do is to seek some guidance from MFE as to how this will play out in the actual final description of how these metrics will be used. The Minister has indicated in a separate letter from the consultation document that he is thinking about using all 4 of these metrics to better address the risk profile for E. coli. But in terms of what's in the consultation material, it's only the 1 metric in the National Objectives Framework that's actually listed. So MFE have said to us that they expect this to change, so we're not sure where it's going to go, basically, but I guess they're talking within the realm of these 4 metrics. But I guess the message here is that you do get different outcomes for the different metrics. And that is a slide that simply is just showing you a distribution of the current metric for exceedances of E. coli over 540, the first column. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of poor quality rivers in the urban area. I should also just note that a lot of the monitoring sites used here are for state of the environment reporting, which is not necessarily the same kind of or monitoring that you would do or in a methodological way for assessing swimmability. So it's an important point. We might need to look at changing how we go about actually collecting some of the data if it was to be used for a different purpose. Maybe one other comment I'll make before I get onto this slide was to note that the amount of data required is about 100 samples over, so it's actually, if these samples are collected on a monthly basis, it's potentially 5 or 10 years before you have sufficient data before you can actually officially rate where you sit with your particular river in a particular site. So it may be that you don't have you don't have until like 2017, let's say if we started now, 2027, an actual indication as to how we're tracking against some of these metrics. Now, you can obviously use preliminary assessments based on a small amount of data, but I guess what's intended through the target and the NPSFM is that there's a minimum of 100 samples collected, which is typically once a month for 10 years. Changes to the NPSFM. Several of these are fairly technical. One of the things that flow on from the targets that are set by the Minister, or desired to be set by the Minister, is that the suggestion is that councils will need to be identifying large rivers and lakes suitable for immersion in their regional plans as a mandatory outcome, and that's probably in some light to kind of provide some transparency as to how a particular council is progressing towards the swimmability target. In terms of our response to that, we're kind of the view that having a plan change to actually track your progress is not the most efficient way to do these sorts of things, and there are other more efficient ways to actually provide more live, up-to-date information on websites and things like that. But the overall intent is to improve water quality so that the risk to human health is reduced. So a number of the changes in the NPSFM are focused on moving more to a risk-based approach, which is actually quite a good message because that actually links in a little bit with some of our marine sampling through SafeSwim. And I guess the other thing is that the Minister's expecting that our regional targets and how they might contribute to the national picture, that councils will need to provide a provisional kind of list of what are the rivers that the council might wish to intervene in, and what are the likely costs of the interventions expected by about September this year, and by about March 2018 that we'll provide some sort of finalised list of what interventions the council might wish to pursue to move towards these targets. That in itself is quite a big ask in terms of actually having a pretty good picture as to where things are at, but I guess it's a case of how difficult do you want to make that and how detailed do you want to make that. But I think it's important to note that there's an expectation from the Minister, Nick Smith, to have that information by March next year. I want to talk, and I guess the only other comment there is that there's a likelihood of new costs in terms of monitoring and compliance activities. That's sort of all wrapped up in all these additional changes that are being proposed. I wish to raise the macroinvertebrate community index. This is an index that's used to kind of give you an indication as to changes in ecosystem health based on the macroinvertebrates in the river. It's well used, but it's also well regarded as something that's got an indicator value, and it has limitations in terms of how it could be interpreted. One of the issues for this particular index is you can't necessarily link cause and effect. It's an indicator. You probably need other measures to sort of align to actually give you a much better picture of what's going on. So this has been widely used in the past on a voluntary basis, but the intent of the NPSFM changes is to make this a mandatory requirement. Because of the limitations in the use of this index, we have had quite a lot of internal discussions about whether or not Auckland Council might support this. We note that Watercare has indicated because of the limitations that they may look to oppose its use. And I guess the other comment I'd make is that last year in the Next Steps to Fresh Water, we also indicated that it has limitations. So I think the messages that Auckland Council put down last year was pretty consistent with where we probably might land on this, but at the moment we probably would need to pick up some text that Watercare have provided us and probably build that into the draft consultation, proposed submission that you've got in front of you, which is only about 3 or 4 lines at the moment. One of the other things that has been raised is more explicit consideration of economic issues, and this differs slightly for water quality issues as opposed to water quantity considerations. In the case of water quality, you must ensure that everything is in a good space for water quality in terms of some of the ecosystem health outcomes before you then consider economic opportunities. In the case of water quantity considerations, they use the word while. So in other words, you can ensure that you meet certain ecosystem health outcomes while providing for opportunity for quantity outcomes or considerations. So there is a bit of a legalese sort of issue here, and there is simply a case of saying, okay, you've set out different kinds of ways that economic considerations are considered for quality versus quantity. So this is something we need to think about and ask for some clarification on that. Auckland Council's current implementation program is quite adaptive and will be needed to be refined as a result of the changes that have been put forward by the NPSFM if they are adopted by government. Moving to the criteria for the Freshwater Improvement Fund, this is the simplest part, I think you could say, of the whole package, in the sense that they're basically indicating that they've got $100 million available in a fund to direct towards vulnerable catchments, which are catchments in their mind that are at the tipping point as opposed to ones that might be already degraded. So they're trying to say, well, let's find catchments that we think with a bit of investment could be turned around. Now, they've used various criteria to actually identify what might be vulnerable catchments in the Auckland region and elsewhere and around the country. And there's only the Hoteo River in the Auckland region that they regard as vulnerable using the criteria that they have used. Our first reaction when we saw this was, well, that wouldn't be our first pick necessarily, but we as officers are preparing a bid to advance some work there because we've just got some other work that's coming to a conclusion at this point, and it does provide an opportunity to sort of piggyback on the back of some good work that's about to finish in the Kaipara. And Northern Regional Council is also putting up some work in the Kaipara as well. So actually there's a number of reasons why it's probably quite a good project. But we actually will signal, and I guess what we've signalled in the submission is that we feel that there is opportunity to consider eligibility criteria in a broader context going forward, and particularly looking at some of the tools that might be used in the future to address both rural and urban issues. So it might be mitigation issues that haven't really been historically considered. So the bid preparation date for this exercise is quite distinct from the submission, which is more about what the criteria that are being utilised going forward. So we're preparing a bid under the criteria that they've put out, but we're also in the submission, we're suggesting through yourselves that that could be a bit broader still. The stock exclusion regulations, now the big issue for Auckland Council is that you've just gone through an an Auckland Unitary Plan exercise that's become operative, where you've gone about identifying rules for stock exclusion that relate to the number of stock units per hectare. You make reference to permanent streams versus intermittent streams. You have a 5-year and a 10-year phase-in for those approaches. The stock type that is covered off by that particular rule set includes horses, sheep, goats, which are not included in the national regulations proposals. And there are a range of exclusion methods available to achieve the outcomes in the Auckland Unitary Plan. In the proposed national regulations, they are basically looking at regulations which are also phased. They apply to a smaller range of stock types, the main ones being the cattle, beef, dairy, and pigs and deer, and they're also looking at the class of slopes. So they're looking at sort of the flat ground, the rolling ground, and the steep land, and looking at sort of what rules you might apply on each of those different gradients at certain time periods. There is a provision in the regulations to allow for a farmer, let's say, to apply for a stock exclusion plan with the council. The basis for what would be considered by the council in considering such an application is completely unknown. There is no sort of clarity on how that would be assessed, and MFE are well aware that that's the case. And the question would be, what level of consistency might you want across the country? How would you approach this on an individual farmer basis? What level of servicing would you be required to have in place to actually address these requests? So, and there's a couple of other things that are different in the national regulations. Some of the national regulation measures are better than the Auckland Unitary Plan, others are not necessarily so. And the more broader point, though, is that the submission really sort of sets out that we need to really evaluate if the two approaches can be integrated. There are a number of operational problems to how this might be implemented. Having two different sets of rules will also be quite, confusing or potentially. I guess what we're sort of looking from the council is to get a bit of direction as to how you might want to approach this issue, because I think it's actually quite complicated. So I'll just leave it there for the moment. Just brief. Ooh, we've just lost the slide.
That was it.
I was going to say, just getting on to the next steps. There we go. The close date for submissions is Friday the 28th of April. The suggestion is that we get a finalised submission to the Chair on the 26th of April for her consideration, signing off. And to do that, we would need to have final input from what we've suggested, which is a subgroup of councillors to look at the proposed submission. And before that, there will be a scan of other regional sector discussions, which have been very ongoing, and also we are hoping to get some further direction from MFE in terms of any further updates from them as to how some of these proposals are going to be interpreted. I've just put down here some of the things that the council might want to build on in the submission that aren't necessarily there already, that we've got, the draft submission. Clearly we need to get some clarity as to how the minister's targets and the intentions of various councils, how they're going to work together, and how they're going to be identified by March 2018. There's a question about some of the requirements in the MPSFM in terms of the need to identify some of the large rivers and lakes in a plan change. One of the key points we noted is that some of the large rivers and lakes that were identified by MFE, and there are about 30 for the Auckland region, are just totally inappropriate in terms of being reference sites. They are, for example, sewage ponds is one example that I discovered. And the mangroves in the Luke Street area in Otahuhu. So, and the other one that we've noted as well is that the water supply areas, so the Hunua dams and also the Waitakere Reservoir, are probably not appropriate in the sense that they're not accessible for public swimming. And Watercare is quite strong on those issues, and we want to just make that observation that we will be looking to include those points in the submission and actually provide a full table of all the 30 different sites, and of those 30 sites, probably 6 or 7 will be probably not appropriate to be included as reference sites. Stock exclusion national regulations, I guess I just should also mention that I was down at Wellington last week, and MFE staff there indicated that they're still working through a whole lot of work about effectiveness of various proposals.
Say again?
MFE are still working through the effectiveness of particular proposals, and so what that indicates to me is that we really need to sort of have a hard look at what's been put in front of us and say, is there an opportunity to look at some sort of transitional provision or savings provision that we don't go down a particular pathway until we know for sure that we're actually going to do the right thing. I guess it's a combination of how much time do you want to allow that to sort of be considered before taking action. And as I mentioned before, stock exclusion plans don't provide any grounds for assessment or a basis for refusal. There will be a lot of requirements on council to implement some of the MPSFM changes, as well as some additional monitoring activities for meeting the targets. And the other key thing is that the MPSFM discussion in Wellington seems to be kind of divorced from some of the other big policy initiatives. And I guess we would need to really say, well, how does this all relate to sort of changes to the RMA? How is this going to change to the initiatives for transport and housing and some of the bigger questions? And so we haven't done that in the submission, but it would be quite a reasonable issue in the Auckland context section, the introductory paragraphs to the submission, for some of those other points to be raised. And that's what I've finished off on there, is to note that we could include that. And the only other comment I think is that we could also include mihi at the start of the submission, which I thought I'd raise, that we hadn't omitted that in terms of what we intended to do. The only other observation is that we have received local board input from the Kaipatiki local board last night that pointed to observations about poor outcomes for small streams as a result of stormwater and sewage issues in the Birkenhead area. And the other local board was the Albert Eden board, which provided a more technical response, and I think that reflected the fact that the staff member involved there has had actually some involvement in MPSFM work in the Waikato over the last 5 years. So that will be a useful one for us to look at. And as I said, we've had observations from Watercare in terms of some of their significant concerns about how reference sites are selected, and also their concerns about MCI. And probably in the introductory text, it would be useful to perhaps note some of the water care infrastructure as part of the Auckland context. So I think that covers off as much as I need to cover off at this point.
Fantastic, thank you. It is a complex and huge issue, so just a couple of quick points. The issue of the mihi has been raised, and the staff are very keen to work, I think, with the Independent Māori Statutory Board members on the correct mihi, and you'll note in the second recommendation we've added, of course, Independent Māori Statutory Board member for the group who'll be working on this. So we'll take questions first, and I will divide this into questions and then the recommendations. So, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. And notwithstanding what was a very comprehensive and I think useful overview on this, and so in no way do I want to diminish that. Furthermore, not diminishing the information you've given us in terms of the eligibility, the limitations with the consultation and strategy. I do want to know, and probably need to be able to respond within my own community, where an organisation like STEPS, which has been in play for 10 years, that's, for those that don't know, the St Luke's Environmental Protection Society, the work that they've done on Meola Creek, the multiple volunteers, and you've touched on the work of the Albert Eden Local Board. It strikes me that there must be some capacity for inclusion of that stream within the submission. I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would like you to be able to respond to me to say how, if it was the mood of this committee to have such included in a submission, how we would go about achieving that.
Yes, so I see no problem at all with doing that, because, I mean, I think the key point we're emphasising with the Auckland region is that while the modelling approach for information purposes is setting out to sort of indicate what things are happening in the large rivers and lakes, we're trying to say to MFE, as we have done in the past, that, you know, we are focused on a lot of small rivers in terms of the issues for Auckland. And the issues that both the Albert Eden and Kaipatiki boards are raising are perfect examples of the kinds of issues that are more prevalent for us. It also indicates, I think, an opportunity for us to actually try and, as you say, build in some of those observations in the Auckland context section. And I see no reason at all why we couldn't by use of examples, include a few of those sites. I guess the key point is that we would end up with quite a long list if I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to indicate the point, which is that there's a lot of small rivers and streams in an urban environment particularly that need some work, and there's quite a bit of capital works already dedicated to that going forward. But yeah, I would...
But Madam Chair, I suppose the supplementary to that is, and I would agree that there is a huge need if you look across the Auckland region, but not all of those sites that we might consider have had continuous monitoring and the technical information that is available that will actually add weight to their inclusion at this time by way of submission. If you could just tell me how many do have that kind of information available in terms of giving weight to such a submission?
Well, as I indicated earlier, that the state of the environment reporting is, in terms of why we collect state of the environment data, is slightly different from swimmability. So that's one sort of qualification. But you can sort of you can see from our state of environment reports the kind of areas we go to collect that information. I guess the other point I want to make quite clearly actually is that the emphasis of central government to focus on the fourth order streams is largely because they went through an exercise and determined that would be what they viewed as swimmable. But for, say, in our Auckland region, we're kind of thinking more about what's happening on the coast. We're thinking about just the aesthetics and other values associated with having clean water. And I think that's the part of the issue for MFE, is that they are now getting a lot of feedback from communities who are saying, oh, does this mean you're going to ignore small streams? And that's not the intent. And it's certainly not the intent of Auckland Council as well, I quickly add. But in the sense that, you know, our program for implementing the MPCVM is going to be focusing on small streams in particular. And so it may be that, for example, we go back to MFE in 10 years' time and say, oh, we haven't actually made much of an improvement in those large streams because all our efforts have been in the small streams, because that's actually the area that people are interested in. So there's that discussion point as well.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I don't want to monopolise time, but can I indicate that I think that we are, despite the excellent work that has been done, I think we're being too muted on the needs of Auckland, and I think that the submission could be made more powerful.
So to that end, we've been working on a recommendation to signal the work that will be ongoing in this committee. We just need to be a bit careful. This submission it's kind of important and it's kind of relevant, but it's not the answer to the critical issues of stormwater and urban water quality in Auckland.
Yeah.
And I think we can put energy into this, and we need to signal this with the Minister, but we've got a much bigger job to do, and we need to do it in partnership with all of our local boards and with our community organisations and our umbrella community organisations that are set up to focus on this. So in my view, we would sell ourselves short by packing too much into this submission. I think it's a signal and a message, but it isn't the full piece of work.
I accept that, Madam
So
Chair, but
what
I
I'm
think we
going to
could do it
do
sharper.
is make clear in a recommendation that this is ongoing work for us, and we'll do it in collaboration and as part of the State of the Environment report, which allows us to pick it up. But as I said at the beginning, Councillor, the recommendation that we have here will be formed up and clarified by the work that is done subsequent to this meeting. Now that we'll have the endorsement of the meeting to use urban water quality as part of the submission, we can do that work. So we're not going to do that around the table right now. We'll do it with the 4 or 5 councillors and the Independent Māori Statutory Board in the work over the next 2 weeks. So we're absolutely saying what you're saying. We're just saying that we need to take time to do it properly. Councillor Cooper.
No, it's okay. I think I don't want to prolong it. I just wanted to talk about lagoons and things like our creeks, really, because that's what we've got more of, but it's not going to be in the brief because it's saltwater, freshwater mix, even though it could be swimmable. But
I think that's part of what we want to expand here, to say, this is, well done, Minister, good start, not totally picking up all the issues in Auckland. Our issues are different, we can do better.
If you look at the Faux River, which is really a creek,
Exactly.
in places like that, it's not even registering in our lagoons, but I think we're doing the best we can, but it's not going to be covered in the submission really. But I just note, Madam Chair, that the clarification of the lagoon type sort of things that we have in the piece of work, but I don't know how it's going to help us to make them more swimmable if we can't apply for that funding. Because some of our issues are our lagoons, because people do want to swim in them.
And that's
because they're not as dangerous as our West Coast beaches, but...
It's exactly the point we're grappling with. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think my issues are the same as Linda and Councillor Cooper's and Councillor Fletcher's issues. The government focuses on big rivers, big lakes. Our focus is on coastal beaches and creeks. So the critical question, I guess I'm asking, are we trying in our submission to say, government, you haven't gone wide enough and you need to change your approach? Or are we simply saying, this is good for as far as you go, but you've just missed the bus on us? Are we trying to turn the government's position around? I suggest that will probably be pretty hard because their focus very much is on rivers and lakes. So, we can do the Auckland context and explain that, but are we actually trying to get them to refocus their policy and, for example, refocus their improvement fund so that it was addressing our issues rather than the issues that they're looking at elsewhere in the country? It's a pretty basic question, but I'm not sure what the answer to that is yet. I don't know whether Dave has got any thoughts on that.
I think we need to probably provide that political guidance, and if I'm listening around the room, I think we're doing quite a lot of one, but most of the other. So in other words, we're pointing out to the government the bits that we agree with, and we won't look a gift horse in the mouth, and we'll say, yes, thank you very much, we'll be applying to the fund for the Hōtio River, that's appropriate. We'll make it clear that we think we've done reasonably well with some of our stock exclusion issues in the unitary plan, so thank you for that. But the bulk of the submission will focus on the fact that the government have missed the point of Auckland, that we are not focused on swimmable large rivers and swimmable lakes, and can we please have a discussion with the government about how we deal with that at a funding, infrastructure and long-term level?
Yeah, and I think if I can just raise another point relevant to that, Madam Chair, it's then going to be about a communication issue, because the people out Point England will be saying, why are you going for funding for the Hōtio River, which most Aucklanders don't know about, don't visit, don't swim in, and why aren't you focused on the Oamaru Creek, an estuary, where we are worried about it? So if we can't change the government's focus, then the communication exercise will have to be around, yes, we are interested in, what's happening in the Oakley Creek, the Oamaru Creek, etc., Meola Creek, but the criteria for the government's fund doesn't apply to the areas that we're most interested in.
I think that's critical. We care about it desperately at the moment. The government don't understand it, so they don't. We need to make sure they do. Dave?
Just an observation. Bearing in mind that the amendments that are put forward don't detract from the fact that in the NPSFM itself, the main document, it does talk about links to the coast and things. So it is that mountains to sea kind of approach in a more broader sense. So we can start to consider things like, what's happening in estuaries and things like that. And I'll make an observation about the Freshwater Improvement Fund. Originally that was only set up for retiring land, so it was very rural focused. The criteria that are in the application now is actually broader. What we're saying is that in addition to we welcome the broad, opening up a bit more, but there are some things we think could be looked at even further, so to really entertain some of the points that you're making.
Yeah, so the thrust of that submission might be you've gone this far, but actually you need to go that far.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Okay, Councillor Wayne Walker.
Mine was a comment, not a question, so I'll leave it at this point.
Okay. Councillor Mike Lee.
Mine is more of a comment rather than a question, Madam Chair. I'll wait to the appropriate time if that's okay.
Okay, we'll just clarify, councillor Cashmore.
Question.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm listening.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought you might have a heap of others. Dave, this is well done. You know, it's really tricky and complex stuff. My question is about the context of the Crown when they drew this up. So water quality to date has been largely privatised to the private sector, largely rural. And the urban sector has been largely ignored, and Auckland's probably exclusionary because we have actually allocated budget to do interceptors and, you know, some serious amount of coin there. Has there been any nation or national work on what is required to deliver best water quality practice for the urban environments, i.e., you know, state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plants and even stormwater through those same plants? Is that work being done at all, so they have a context for their judgments?
I think there's more work to be done. I think that there are some initiatives for best management practice guides that are being worked on. I think there are a number of initiatives to look at 3 waters in terms of how that all works. But I think my general observation is that it's not well developed, or certainly not as well developed as what it should be. That the original starting point for NPS was largely based around rural, as you know, and really it's been Auckland in particular who've been saying that, you know, the focus needs to shift. In the Next Steps for Fresh Water document last year, they started bringing out some material in that consultation about efficiency, and starting to pick up on some of the economic considerations, starting to pick up on some of the infrastructure considerations. Next year, later this year, they're looking to probably form their views in central government about allocation issues and come out with something probably next year on that. So I think we're getting to the point where they're going to have to start to really dig deeper into the kinds of issues you've just identified.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd like to comment later, please, if that's all right.
Oh, that's good. Councillor Simpson.
No, I was going to add another recommendation, noting that, or ask a question whether you'd be interested in adding another recommendation. But I think it's going to be covered in the actual submission as it is. I think the point is that, look, the government's got its brief and wants to do its stuff, that's fine. My suggestion of a recommendation was notes that Auckland Council's priorities are da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But if you're happy to leave it as it is, noting that it will be covered in vague form, I'm just picking up probably really where the Mayor and Councillor Cooper and Councillor Fletcher were coming from, but it's over to you, Madam Chair.
What we're working on is, and we're just trying to come up with something that feels like it doesn't try and be Uncle Tom Cobley and all. Yeah, acknowledging that, you know, at the moment, this consultation is focused on lakes and rivers of a larger order than we've got here in Auckland. But once the State of the Environment report is completed, that we ask the staff to report back to us on how we progress urban water quality and coastal water quality. And that piece of work feels critical because it leads into our discussion on the LTP, which is, yep, we can set a series of outcomes that we want around water quality in the Auckland region, but it's no good just talking about it. We have to put some serious coin into it, and that for me is the bit that feels like the critical issue.
So to
we're
that
just
end,
trying to
it's
word it up correctly.
Yeah, it's whether you'd consider putting that to wrap up those
We
set of
do.
recommendations.
We're
and that's
just getting the right words. So we're all, you know, this is something that's taken quite a lot of time over the last week. So believe you me, we are putting a huge amount of thought into this, but trying to, as I say, if I'm appearing to be a little bit unhelpful, it's we cannot solve the issue of Auckland's urban water quality through this submission. We need to do a parallel and critical piece of work that genuinely engages in this, because in my opinion this is probably one of the most important things that this council should be engaging in.
And I think you made that very clear, so thank you, and thank you for working on
Lovely.
the recommendation.
Our wise head on my left is working on that.
Great
So
mind.
I'll move I'll move these recommendations, and we'll just finesse the next one coming, which is the we two from here. So I'll move those if someone would like to second them. Councillor, thank you, Councillor Darby will second, and that gives us the opportunity to speak to these. But please, let's not traverse everywhere where we've gone before. So Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, I just say well done to the team. Just some of the comments I would have around this is the science is complex and possibly impossible to untangle. And you could spend millions doing that, and rather than spending the millions actually doing the mitigation works in our communities and achieving good outcomes. I mentioned about the urban context, and we're probably talking hundreds of billions of dollars to bring that nationwide up to scratch. So there's a really serious lack of understanding about what that cost is. And I'd just like to emphasise a little bit more from a farming perspective. The rural sector's already done a huge amount. 97% of dairies stock are excluded nationwide. Hill country guys are doing what they can. I'd like to come back to that in a tick. But then you've got the context of how do you stock exclude the South Island High Country, or the Taihape Country, or the King Country? It's basically physically and practically impossible. And that's why when we did our work in the unitary plan, we talked about stock numbers per hectare. So lack of intensification means a reduced amount of effluent and a reduced amount of fertiliser use. So the secret to us in our unitary plan discussions and with the NGOs who were in agreement with us was let's keep the numbers of stock per hectare at a measurable level for stock exclusion. So if you go through that levels or you're intensifying your operation, then you have to exclude stock from waterways. And an extensive regime for stock means an extensive use of fertiliser, so not nitrogen generally and not the problems associated with that. So I think our unitary plan one is getting better recognition down in Wellington. They're sort of seeing it as actually the slope stuff gets very complex across any one property, let alone any one catchment. How do you measure that and how do you put it in place? It might not be the prerequisite for all. And the comment I'd make that a lot of this work to date has been based around Canterbury, which might not be the perfect template for the rest of the country. So I think, yes, we've got some work to do. As a nation, we've got some understanding to come to. We've got some very, very big checks to write out to achieve nirvana here. But the work must be done and we must progress it, but it's not going to happen overnight. And the last point I'd make is where the minister, I took Nathan Guy into the Oriri Valley after the recent rains and the storms, and where on some properties there had been hundreds of thousands of plants put in the ground, and some of them were 8 and 15 years old, and stock excluded on 20-degree slopes to 30-degree slopes. It was gone. 80% of it was gone, rolled up in big balls, wire, mess, trees coming out of dock estate, trees coming out of forestry estate, millions of dollars worth of damage. And the property owners will be putting that back as they can over the years to come, and there's some real challenges for some of those, especially the small lifestyle blocks. So the stock exclusion with fencing and planting sounds all very good in theory, but in practice, when you get weather events like this, and this is only the second biggest one we've had since '66, they put you right back past square one. So I question the understanding of the reality of which the climate in which we live currently. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore, and I think we'll pick that up. I think stock numbers, slope, rainfall, soil type, different all around the region. No good setting a one-size-fits-all method.
Doesn't work.
It should be set the outcome and individual areas deal to the outcome.
Yep.
I think that's the essence of the unitary plan. Right, so we've got Member Brown.
Kia ora. And I too also echo the support given around the work and the preparation that's gone on, and there's still lots to do. Earlier you made a comment around the reservoirs and the hunua, which I completely understand, but I just wanted certainty that we're not talking about excluding the Wairau River from this whole, given that it's at the foot of the reservoirs.
So no, we're not suggesting exclusion of the Wairau River. That would still be left in. Yep.
Could I just, in the Wairau as an example, where at the headwater you can swim, but in the belly and the tail, you'd lose your body parts if you stuck it in there. So, is it possible then that in that example, the government's position will be, well, actually it is swimmable, just up there?
So I want to also draw to your attention the reference sites like the Maharangi and the Henderson Creek, where half of those sites are actually got a tidal influence. And so, for the Wairau it might be different, right? Different reason why it wouldn't be a suitable thing. It probably also links into where the actual monitoring site is. And yeah, I guess the other comment I'd make is that a lot of the mapping is based on particular reaches of the river. So for example, the map for the Hoteo River, you've actually got 3 different colours. They've actually managed to segment each section of the river and provide an analysis as to what colour it might be or category. So it is possible that you might be able to do that for the Wairau. So, yeah.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Just following on then, if we took the Tāmaki River, so I'm assuming that's included.
No, it's because that's marine, pretty much. Or estuary, yeah.
Yep. Well, see, this is where I guess we've got a real interest insofar as the interpretation of our languages, eh? So the Tāmaki River isn't a topography you would look at like we assume you do. Because if I add Te Wharau to Tāmaki, which is part of the Tāmaki River, now I'm starting to talk about the Otara Lakes. But it's not called the Otara Lakes until recently here at Council. It's called Te Wharau, or Tāmaki Awa. So it's a river. Yeah. Is my point around, similar to the Wairau. And around, so, and catching up on Councillor Cashmore's comment, and which I'm agreeable to, around the differences between rural and urban challenges. But if we took rural, can we not start there and actually just deal with that if urban is so hard? Because for Māori, as long as we have standards that permit get out of jail free cards when things go wrong, there are some challenges around everyone's ability to actually get everybody into swimmable water. And the event of the rain of recent times, I accept Councillor Cashmore's position, but I'm also aware of a number of other farmers who didn't plant anything and have just blamed the rainfall apparently for all their plants that they planted go washing down the floods. So in the Wairau case particularly, it's not just the effects and the activities of forest and farms, it's actually the flow of the reservoirs that really stagnate that water body into it. Starting as Waipuhi, pure water at the headwater of the Hunua Falls, and ending up as Waimate out at the river mouth at Potor where the water is dead. So we're excited by it because it is quite an optimistic statement similar to PES3. And I think we have the appetite for the challenges, whether rural or urban. But I would really probably encourage you to explore the Māori naming spaces of rivers in this town, that they are not single dimension topographies off a map, that they actually in some part, not all the time, certainly in the Wairau and the Tāmaki, include the greater water bodies other than just the core river itself. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So we could pick that up in the submission. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't disagree with anything said round the table today, and I support the submission. A year ago, I would have had no issues with the submission at all, but it seems that we are missing a very big point here. There is an elephant in the room. First of all, the objectives, or the target, it's a different word, target, isn't it, not objectives, is to achieve a much improved swimmability of our rivers and lakes by 2040. It seems to be in line with the government's commitment to have the country predator-free by 2050 and have trams to the airport in 2047. But I understand that this initiative has come about because of major pressure throughout the rest of New Zealand. It's essentially, as the submission largely acknowledges, not mainly an Auckland problem in terms of rivers and lakes, but it certainly is a major problem that is conflicting with the government's 100% pure international tourism campaign. So something is or steps are being taken, or the appearance of same, to deal with this. Madam Chair, we deal in terms of rural New Zealand, and I know the submission states that we are mainly rural in terms of land area, but in rural New Zealand, there is a major conflict, economic conflict, between the use of rivers for primary production, that is entailing extraction and discharging, and the use of them for tourism and for recreation, heritage recreation, if you will, something that New Zealanders feel is their birthright, and correctly so. There's a conflict there that needs to be acknowledged. It's not clear how this conflict will be resolved here. The second conflict relates to our own problems in Auckland, which is not a matter of primary production, but a matter of construction and development. That's our big industry here in Auckland. We don't extract so much for economic purposes in terms of the dairying sector, the way the dairying sector does. However, we certainly discharge, and the source of the discharge is people. And I don't think the reassuring words, I can't really disagree with them, really cover the scale of the problem we are faced with. I said a year ago I probably wouldn't have raised any issues around this paper, but I think all of us, like me, are much better informed about the sheer scale of the pollution problem we have, not only in our waterways, but in coastal waters where people like to swim. And if dirty rivers and dirty lakes conflicts with 100% pure, dirty beaches and waterways in Auckland does as well, and certainly conflicts with our own aspirations to be the most livable city in the world. There is the solution in rural New Zealand will be difficult. The solution in Auckland will be expensive, not necessarily difficult at all. It requires a willingness by all of us to take a completely different strategic position on our spending priorities. The central interceptor has been mentioned in here, and for years, I, like many other Aucklanders, have been reassured that the central interceptor is coming. But now the scales have been removed from our eyes. The central interceptor will not solve the problem at all. It will help, but we still have a major issue with the separation of stormwater and sewerage, especially in the shared or the common sewerage area, combined sewerage area, which is 16,000 households. That means the scale of our problem is at least, to take a conservative number, from Watercare's AEE of 2012, 2.2 million cubic metres of stormwater-driven sewage going into our waterways and onto our beaches, particularly in the harbour or in our coastal waters, not onto our beaches, in the water around our beaches, which raises, as we all are aware, real questions about swimmability in the most populous part of the country. So we're not talking about countryside rivers here, we're talking about places where masses of New Zealanders want to go and swim. So in some ways, our problem is even worse than in rural New Zealand, and I think we need to first acknowledge that, and other members, I think you have, Madam Chair, mentioned the need to acknowledge that more forthrightly, that we have a major problem bordering on crisis level and that we need to deal with it, and any step to improve water quality or raise awareness is to be welcomed. But we shouldn't lowball, we shouldn't talk down, we shouldn't underrate the seriousness of this problem. I can talk about Meola Creek, which even after the central interceptor will still be heavily polluted, will still be an open sewer, and that's not good enough. It's not good enough for Auckland, it's not good enough for us, and we need to completely change our approach here. So, Madam Chair, I'll close on those words, but the real concern, I guess, here, the common concern, I don't see much mention of the life-supporting capacity of ecosystems. That's a major issue. But I guess, taking an anthropocentric point of view, it's health that's a real concern. Now, we know that we've had record rain in March, and we had the drinking water issue, and to be fair, bulk water, drinking water is probably our best organised set of infrastructure that we have, and even that got challenged. But because of those rains, millions, I guess, of cubic litres swished around the city, contaminated with sewage, and whether it's related or not, I'll just make the point, that is a real risk for human health. Whether the typhoid outbreak, which somebody passed away with today, is related to that, I don't know. But we do know that it's a risk, and I think it is something that we need to take really seriously. I acknowledge the chairman of the new coalition, Stop Auckland Sewage Overflows, is here today, Judge Abbott, and I acknowledge him. And I have to say, Madam Chair and members, this will be an issue even greater than transport in Auckland over this coming term. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think anyone is endeavouring to have reassuring words here. I'm very glad now I've felt a little bit of a lone voice in my frustration with water care and the complete lack of urgency with the central interceptor. I'm very glad that we seem to all now be speaking a little bit more with one voice, and I find that the continuation of the sewage system that is amalgamated with rainwater is completely unacceptable, and that seemed to have lacked urgency as well. We're not going to solve that today, neither are we going to solve that in this submission. I hope that today has absolutely raised people's single-minded passion around the table for us to deal with this, and the recommendations that we've got in here starting to lead us in that direction. We'll deal with the submission to government on their issues. We will, however, continue to raise the fact that we need to deal with our urban water, wastewater, and the quality of our coastal waters in the region. And I will keep pushing that agenda and that process for as long as I can breathe. I've got Councillor Wayne Walker, Member Wilcox, Mayor Goff, and Councillor Darby, and then I think we need to move on to the item that we had put off. Bearing in mind, this is a lot of work ahead of us on this one, on this issue. We're not going to deal with it all today. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just like to emphasise that you're not a lone voice. Madam Chair, there have been a number of councillors, particularly myself, that have been more than active and vocal on this general issue. I just want to address a question first around engaging in this process. I think that it's useful, but it's very much a distraction. What we see on the table is something from the government that's impractical, it doesn't work, it's irrelevant, in the sense that it doesn't capture the rivers and the streams that we have in Auckland where people swim. And just as an aside, for example, if I look at the North Shore, and we've got quite a few people living on the North Shore, there ain't a stream in the North Shore that comes within this categorisation process. And if I go a bit further up to Albany, and I look at streams like Rewa, Waiti, Okura, they don't feature either. So my comment is, it's irrelevant. It's also somewhat of a distraction in the sense that it's actually incredibly misleading, because it almost suggests that rivers are going to be swimmable that, frankly, you'd never want to swim in. And I think the public at large knows that, and I think internationally we know that. And the general context is we know that our streams and our rivers in New Zealand are literally going down the gurgler in terms of their
Councillor
ecosystem health.
Walker, we're just, with the greatest of respect, we're just after 12. We're starting to circle back on points people have made.
I expect to be a fraction of the time that some speakers have taken.
I know.
If I can continue.
Just shush for a moment. I allowed Councillor Lee to speak. He hasn't spoken today. Some people have spoken several times. Councillor Lee was in full cry on this issue. I imagine this is the only issue he's going to speak on today, and I let him take his full amount of time. So he's already said those wise words. We don't need to repeat them. So if you can just bring your issue to a head.
Scarcely repeating them, Madam Chair. So having said that, my contention is that this is an absolute distraction. It's political. So I've got some suggestions. Quite obviously, one that I continue to repeat is that we need a water strategy. I won't go into what that is, but we do not have one. We do not have a joined-up approach across council. We know that parts of council, like water care, want that.
Okay, so that's recommendation B, is heading in that direction.
Marvellous.
Up there.
Yep.
The other concern that I've got is that quite obviously this process is political, and we need to be engaging with other political parties, like the Greens, like Labour, like New Zealand First, because this is simply too important for Auckland and it's too important for New Zealand. And I think we have a danger that this process just takes us into a space that's incredibly limiting. So I would suggest that we do that, and I think that the new mayor is in a good position to be able to do that, and I'm sure that there would be a lot of support on the part of council. And this goes to not just this issue, but a whole range of issues where we need to be on the front foot for Auckland, not allowing us to be distracted by things and for example, the Auckland Plan refresh and others, but focused on issues around funding, around critical environmental issues, that we need to be on the front foot across all parties and supplying information to Aucklanders so that they have a clear impression of what our problems are and the solutions.
Thank you, Councillor. I would imagine a water strategy would be absolutely at the heart of an Auckland Plan refresh. Member Wilcox.
Yes, so my comments are basically, I suppose we've come to the point now where we have to face up to the fact that our practices before lack the awareness that we don't control the environment, and that we're actually part of it, but it controls us. And so when you do bad things, these are the things that happen. I mean, it's a challenge for the council, but it's also a challenge for Māori itself. Māori, especially in the rural areas, the largest farm in Auckland is Māori. The forestry industry within Auckland is dominated by Māori. So it's there's a sting in the tail there, because it's obviously there's an economic factor that's going to affect not only Auckland but Māori in particular. So for Māori, there's a real concern here that whilst we're going to do one thing on one side, we're actually going to take something else away in another area. The issue for Māori is that there is this challenge that the council itself faces. I don't think the whakaaro of Māori is that of any other New Zealander, that we want clean water, that it's our right, it's our birthright, as Councillor Lee said, to swim in water. As a child, I can remember going to see my cousins in Otara and wondering why they weren't swimming in the creek down the back. Because, for me it was, wherever there's water, I want to swim there or play in the water. That's our legacy, and this is the legacy that I'd like to leave to our children as well. But I think council, we've got to make the step, and I thought we did when we signed off, was it $26 million for Takanini Swamp? I mean, I thought that was a big call, because otherwise that stormwater was just going to go everywhere and then just plonk straight into the harbour. We face these issues throughout Auckland, Mairangi Bay, where houses just the water just pours through subdivisions and just goes straight into the harbour. Without clean, fresh, swimmable water, well, basically without water that's clean, we don't have clean coasts. And I'd just like to point out that I'm just a bit concerned that we're not really focusing on some of our lakes, which are there, and which we should be, supporting, because some of our lakes still are in pristine condition. I know Rototoa is one of them. And so I think we should be looking also at our lakes that exist to date.
Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a brief comment, and it goes back to the question I asked at the beginning about the scope of our submissions. When we talk about the imperative to improve water quality and swimmability, we can't make an artificial division between our rivers and lakes and not talk about our creeks and our beaches. Most of us as New Zealanders, and overwhelmingly most of us as Aucklanders, swim off our beaches rather than our rivers. That's where we go for our holidays. And those beaches are in turn infiltrated by whatever comes down the small streams and the creeks that go onto those beaches. And my worry is that if we don't use this opportunity here to broaden the scope of water quality from rivers and lakes to include creeks and beaches, then that will be something that is never addressed. And I think, use the analogy that Councillor Mike Lee used, when we talk about 100% pure, which I suppose should be 80% by 2030, 90% by 2040, but when we talk about it as a great slogan, we're not simply talking about one aspect of our environment. We've got to be talking about the wider aspect. And I think that we need a joined-up approach with government using this mechanism, and we should use this opportunity to encourage government to broaden it out and say, hey, if it is about water and it is about swimmability, then you've got to include your creeks, you've got to include your beaches. Otherwise, we will never get there. We won't address the things that are pressing problems to Aucklanders, and people will continue to write articles about why are we interested in stock getting into water but not interested in the quality of our beaches. Aucklanders will expect us in this submission to focus on the issues that are critical to them, but I would hasten to add critical to all people living in urban areas around the country. There is a connectedness there, and we should be promoting the government to expand its scope to take into account that connectedness.
Agree, provided they expand the putia of coin that they put in place for us to do that.
We certainly want that as well.
And we'll be raising this in the submission. If the government set gold standard for all water bodies in Auckland, we will be up for billions and billions and billions. We simply could not afford to do that. So we just need to be very clear what we're saying to government and what we're asking for. And we also need to pick up that corresponding challenge in our Auckland Plan refresh, Councillor Walker, and in our LTP. And we may need to look at the amount of money that we actually rates fund to clean up our waterways and our water bodies. That's my passion.
You're suggesting more
let's
rates?
not. Well, we make passionate statements here about what we want to do.
Yep.
We have to put the money in there to do it. And I think that's the big discussion that we've got ahead of us. So I just think, at the risk of being, a kind of a bringing a black cloud of stormwater over the top of this, we need to be realistic. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to thank Dave and the team for bringing this work. And I guess I would like to say to the staff, be ambitious in our submission here, because this is a big topic. And yes, it has some big price tags to it, but I don't look at price cost as being enough of a reason to ignore and keep our heads underwater on this. We've got to find out what the enormity of the problem is, and then, yes, you look at costs and solutions that might be wrapped around that. But I'm not warned off something just because it has costs downstream on it, no pun intended. But, this is presented as the clean water package. in some ways, sort of sitting here thinking it's a bit more like pass the parcel, and I was thinking of that children's game where you have this wrapping of a parcel and it passes to the next one, and you eventually get to the centre and there's this small, cheap thing. And there's no small, cheap thing at the centre of this. This is, as the Mayor's just outlined, this is how we advertise ourselves as New Zealanders. And this is how a lot of the world sees us, through these lenses. So I think we've got to be extremely strong in our submission here and not back away. I'm picking that a lot of Aucklanders and a lot of New Zealanders are looking towards us as the big city in this country to be at the forefront of this discussion going forward. This discussion's not going to go away for many, many years now, and at least the government's commenced it. But the reality is, around this city of ours and around the nation, we have a disgraceful number of absolutely polluted rivers, streams, lakes, wetlands, and the list goes on. And I think it's important to hear the words of Councillor Mike Lee there. While this is focusing on human health, and that's one way to measure it because it touches us, we should not lose the sight of the life-supporting capacity of our water systems. Yeah, it's in some ways I can understand why we measure it against our well-being and are not prepared to measure it against the well-being of complete and healthy habitats. It's interesting also that this is really on the table because of community concern. It actually hasn't been led politically. Though some politicians have been involved, there's been a real community uprising here. And I think it's going to stay with us. It's not going to go away because it's been really private research and studies of some councils more than it has been government agencies that have brought this to the fore. Our very own Marine Spatial Plan for the Hauraki Gulf sea change has identified this as a big, big issue. And they identified 4 key water quality areas to address. And in some ways, this work of government's only addresses one of those key 4. They looked at nutrients, heavy metals, pathogens, so this is addressing the pathogen area, and sediment. But sediment is the major one. And of course, this doesn't go near it at all. And the Hauraki Gulf is just dead, well, dead in parts, and severely compromised, probably through the Hauraki Gulf 2/3 when you look at the plume that wanders out there, that is out there now. In terms of stock exclusion, yep, we've landed our unitary plan decisions, and I actually think they were quite weak, personally. And I look at the RMA, and the RMA says it's an offence to discharge contaminants into water. That's what it says. It is an offence, and that includes discharging contaminants containing E. coli from stock. So I actually think we need to go back to some of the legislation that we know is in place, that we've all bought into, to actually support our submission and to go stronger than our unitary plan stock exclusion provisions. We've got an issue there. And the Hauraki Gulf Sea Change Group has reinforced that. So we've got new evidence in, since the unitary plan was landed, that we need to take into account to inform our decision on stock exclusion. Things have changed since we landed the unitary plan. Seems very recent, but more is now in our knowledge bank to support further submission work here. So a lot has been said here today, but I think we're embarking on a very long journey here, and the public are looking at our work and have high expectation that we are going to be strong in our submission. And I really want to reinforce and give the staff the opportunity to pick that up and write a submission, draft a submission for our political reference that reflects the future, not just treading water.
Councillor Darby, that's going to be our work. So we'll note that you are included in that group, and we're going to be the ones who are going to be adding that backbone and that strong political stance to this. Yeah.
Just a quick observation that the focus of the consultation document is very much on that E. coli attribute state, but the NPSFM framework obviously talks about broader compulsory values, including the ecosystem health value. So there are those other things that are there. There's also the opportunity through the NPSFM to develop regional attributes, and there has been some preliminary work done on developing attributes for heavy metals, as well as a national initiative to look at sedimentation and how you might measure that. So there's other things that are in the fire, as they say, but I just wanted to acknowledge that that's part of that broader work program.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Madam Chair, I was just merely making grammatical changes to the amendments. Thank you, I've done that.
That's lovely. Thank you for that. Okay, I think we're at the other end, so...
Madam Chair.
Oh, Councillor Fletcher.
Madam Chair, I am pleased to see the additional inclusions that have been added since you and Councillor Darby moved the recommendations. But I would like you to consider including Councillor Lee in the group that will sign off this submission. We are giving you authority to strengthen, and in my own case, I don't think we are being sufficiently strong in highlighting to central government that this response has been inadequate. So I'd like to see Councillor Lee as part of that group, because I know he doesn't hold back at times, and I think amongst you all we might get the submission to a point that we can all have a measure of comfort.
Happy to accept that.
Indeed. The discussion that I'd had with staff is that, in my mind, this is such a critical issue that I was actually going to alert all of us to the day or the 2 or 3 days or whenever we'd meet, and that actually everyone's welcome. I don't think, we'll make sure that we've got a key group of people who are available, because there's going to be quite a lot of work involved in this, but I welcome any input from any councillors. So let's... Oh, we can add it in, but we'll also alert all councillors so that they know when it's on. So finally, councillors, this and members, this is a critical issue. It is, as I said, probably one of the biggest issues that we will deal with. I don't want us to think that by dealing with this, we've dealt with the whole issue. This is a very small subset, although vital. We need now to fully engage with our community and with the complexity of a regional freshwater, stormwater and water quality plan. And I emphasise again that this needs to be picked up as part of the Auckland plan refresh. If that's what we want to do, we need to make sure that this flows into the LTP so that we fund this work. We can do it with government, with the private sector, with our community, but without us making it a priority, we're not going to have the budget to do it. It's not stepping away, Councillor Darby, or being frightened of this because of the cost. It's saying let's be honest and transparent. If we're going to do it, let's put it in every single plan possible. So I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. I'm going to just thank you to the staff who've worked so hard on this, and look forward to hanging out with you quite a lot over the next couple of weeks. We'll just go back to our item briefly, and thank you to the staff for arriving to be able to answer questions. Back to item 11, Arts and Culture Regional Work Programme, and I know, thank you, Councillor, we'll go straight to Councillor Fletcher for your question on Eden Albert, and I just note back up from Councillor Kathy Casey, who's very keen that that issue be addressed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To our officers, I would just like to know the consultation that's taken place. We did have the sod turning at Mount Albert this very morning. There is a huge level of expectation from the community. I would hate to see this long overdue project being shortchanged.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, it's just the public art aspect.
what transpired was where had identified the opportunity for public art, the ground plane, basically being the pavement underneath, was going to have a treatment on it, which was an artistic treatment. So that talks about the various maunga around the area, the directions, Māori names, etc. And when we took the view that, well, we've got a piece of public art here and the ground plane, it looked like they were fighting against one another. So we made the call, we took it to a papa, which is the advisory panel for clarity, and they made the determination that actually it should be one or the other rather than the two overcrowding the space. At the same time, we were made aware that there is a sort of a phase 2 opportunity in the town centre which will become available in the next year or so, and that may present a better opportunity for a public art.
This current redevelopment is due to be complete in February. Can you just give me the assurance that the Albert Eden Local Board have accepted the position that you've just outlined?
Look, I can't actually confirm that. It's not me who's been the project manager, but I can certainly look into it to ensure. I would assume always as a state of stakeholder management that we make the local board aware of what's going on.
Because, Madam Chair, I just highlight that I don't believe they are. We do have the potential for some conflict here, and I'd just like to make sure that that can be ironed out comfortably. If it is the intention to do that piece of public art during the second stage of the redevelopment, I think that everyone will be very happy with it. But I'd just like to know that they are comfortable with this position as it is at the moment.
I can certainly follow that through.
I'm happy to support the rest of the recommendations, but I'd like that resolved before I vote on that one.
That's good. We will make sure it is. Councillor Cooper.
I'm happy to second. Just that question I had about the increased various gift offers project. Can I just have an explanation of what that means? It's something to do with asset management, but I'm not sure.
Just to refresh your memory, you had a variance report end of last year, I think it was November, where we actually decreased down the...
Different committee then?
We had basically 100k for gifts because we never quite know what's coming through the pipeline.
So you mean they gifts coming in and then we work out how to look after them? That's what I want to know what it is.
Yeah, pretty much. So we have an allowance every year to do the due diligence, whether a gift is suitable, whether it needs resource consent, all of those sort of associated costs that don't come with the gift. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Filipaina?
Just wanted to ask your leeway in regards to just one comment around the art manager who's now gone, that's all. Just wanted to acknowledge Kay Glamuzina, who has left and gone to Melbourne. So she's left council, but this particular work over the last 6 years with the committee I used to chair, this is the agenda items that came through. So I really just wanted to acknowledge her work, plus our staff, but I just wanted to do it publicly, Chair.
That's nice.
That's nicely done. Thank you,
Thank
Councillor Filipaina. Indeed. Kay, above and beyond the call of duty, that woman.
Yeah.
Okay, so people are comfortable. I'm happy to move. You happy to second, Councillor Filipaina? Oh no, Councillor Cooper seconded.
Councillor Cooper.
I'm happy for Councillor Filipaina to do it if he
move. Councillor Filipaina can second.
Affinity there.
Thank you, Chair.
Excellent.
Madam Chair, could you just, on the one about the
Eden Albert?
Yeah, can you take that one separately, because I don't wish to vote on that at this point until I have that information.
That's absolutely fine. So we'll take 1, 2, 3. No, we'll take 1, 2, the one that isn't number 6. We'll take those. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And then we'll take Eden Albert separately. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And do you want to against or abstain?
I'd just rather
Councillor?
abstain at this time.
That's fine.
I'll abstain too, Madam Chair.
Yep, no, that's all good.
Kathy would want me to do that.
And well, we can just, without making too much of a drama out of it, we can, particularly Councillor Fletcher can abstain, and we can just make a note, further clarification will be sought.
Subject clarification.
Excellent. That's lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming in quickly for that. So we moved finally to the information report. item 14. I'm happy to. Councillor Philip Lyon has moved. I'll second that it be received. All those in favour, please say aye.
Have a question? Have a question?
Aye.
Well, I'm not too sure. Councillor, depends on who's here to answer the question. These ones are best just directed at the issue itself. Question?
Well, I was just going to ask where the place might be for a water strategy in our program.
Auckland Plan Refresh.
No, it's not Auckland Plan Refresh. That's going to be Ben Hur stuff.
Well, let's debate it.
So why don't we just discuss that when the item comes back to us as per the recommendation? I will go on to extraordinary items. There are none, and we'll move the publicly excluded for one very brief item. I'm happy to move that. Seconded, Councillor Cooper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And we'll just take a moment, and then we will deal with that. Just while we're still in public, can I just thank everyone for a very involved discussion on water and stormwater. I think that was excellent, and I appreciate it because there's been a huge amount of thought that's gone into this item.
I'll wait till one of those other ones come up there. That's an idea.